Chapter 230. What amused Mo Chenga was that another woman came to Shanqing Palace, and she was even the arrogant and despotic kind. Mei Mei, Lan, Zhu, Qin, Qi Hua and Hua. Those people finally understood her good points, so they immediately changed their personalities and ran to her every 2 or 3 days. Not only did they inform her, but they also fanned the flames. Afterward, not only did she know everything about this woman, but she also knew what she did every day, who she met, and why she got angry. This nominal martial niece was called Ruan Mingzhu. When senior martial brother Qingyuan died, she was only 5 or 6 years old. At an age when she didn't understand anything, she was taken to her master's side and taught by him personally. At the same time, her master returned to the Qin clan in the secular world and took back senior martial brother Shoujing. The two of them were about the same age. They cultivated and lived together since they were little. One lived in Mingxin residence while the other lived in the Zhili building next door. They could be said to be childhood sweethearts. After living together for several decades, Ruan Mingzhu naturally thought senior martial brother Shoujing would always be with her. Who knew that senior martial brother Shoujing actually had a dull personality? Normally, he always immersed himself in cultivation and ignored her good intentions. She was annoyed and wanted her grandmaster, who loved her, to make decisions for her, but it was useless for others to make decisions for her. As the two of them gradually grew up, the difference in their cultivation levels and temperaments became bigger and bigger. Senior martial brother Shoujing gradually stopped paying attention to her. If he wasn't immersed in cultivation, he would travel around and never stay in the cave. Ruan Mingzhu had long been accustomed to everything being hers. Whenever she wanted something, her grandmaster who loved her would immediately give it to her. How could she stand senior martial brother Shoujing ignoring her? The more she couldn't get something, the more she wanted it. However, the distance between them grew bigger and bigger as their cultivation levels fell apart. After they advanced to the core formation realm, senior martial brother Shoujing moved out of Shanqing Palace. Ruan Mingzhu didn't think she should cultivate diligently, but she kept making things difficult for the female disciples who worked for senior martial brother Shoujing. In the end, it finally led to a disaster. These words were passed to her by Xiuqin and the others. They didn't like this senior martial sister Ruan, but they couldn't do anything because they were hindered by their grandmaster, so they hoped Mo Chenga would take the lead and teach her a lesson. Unfortunately, Mo Chenga didn't listen at all. She just immersed herself in her own business, making them very disappointed. Of course, she knew Ruan Mingzhu was very angry because her master wouldn't let her come back, so she kept causing trouble to the maids. However, she had already promised her master that she could only pretend to be deaf and mute. Besides, Ruan Mingzhu didn't provoke her, so why would she look for trouble with her? Since this matter didn't concern her, Mo Chenga had always been very calm. Martial Uncle Mo, I heard this senior martial sister Ruan calls Martial Uncle Shoujing senior martial brother. Mo Chenga, who was sitting in front of Mingxin Residence's pool, held Fei Fei in her arms and fed it. She uttered a nonchalant N. Seeing that she didn't respond, Qingqi rolled her eyes and continued, I heard that Grandmaster wanted senior martial sister Ruan to change her way of addressing him, but senior martial sister Ruan refused even if she died. Martial Uncle Shoujing didn't care either. Mo Chenga continued to calmly respond with an N. Xiuqin had no choice but to ask, Martial Uncle Mo, do you have any ideas? Mo Chenga fed a spirit fruit to Fei Fei, then let it wander on its own. She then said, I don't have any thoughts. Xiuqin and Qingqi looked at each other, unwilling to give up. Don't you think that senior sister Ruan is too, that? Unfortunately, Mo Chenga just stared at them with a faint smile on her face. It was only after she stared at them that she finally said, Then what do you want? Do you want me to teach her a lesson? Xiuqin and Qingqi chuckled, then whispered, This senior martial sister Ruan is very dissatisfied with you, martial uncle. She heard that you're living in Mingxin residence now and almost smashed her own house. Although she endured it in the end, she's been cursing you behind your back. Right. Qingqi took over the conversation. I heard everything that day. Senior martial sister Ruan said you're just a foundation building cultivator, so why did Grandmaster look at you differently? Why did you have to worship Grandmaster as your master? Why did you have to live in Mingxin residence? She also said that you think highly of yourself and that Grandmaster likes her the most. While listening to Xiuqin and Qingqi's gossip, Mo Chenga flipped through the book in her hand. When she heard this, she finally looked up. Xiuqin and Qingqi were secretly delighted, thinking they managed to persuade her. Unexpectedly, Mo Chenga just said, Don't you think Master doesn't know you're gossiping here? Xiuqin and Qingqi paused, speechless. How could matters in Shanqing Palace escape Grandmaster's eyes? It all depended on Grandmaster's attitude. Emo Chenga smiled, then stood up and knocked on their shoulders with her book. Why are you paying so much attention to someone who's going to leave sooner or later? She thinks she's smart, so why are you so stupid? Xiuqin and Qingqi glanced at each other and suddenly understood. They immediately smiled and said, "Martial Uncle Emo, thank you for your advice." Emo Chenga waved her hand and said nothing, planning to go back to the cultivation room. But right at that moment she heard a voice outside. "Wow, what's this? It's so cute." Emo Chenga raised her head to look at the entrance of Mingxin residence and frowned. When Xiuqin and Qingqi saw this, they hurriedly walked out. Not long after, the voices of two people could be heard. "Greetings to Senior Martial Sister Ruan." And Ruan Mingzhu's arrogant voice sounded as if they were calling her martial uncle. "Senior Martial Sister Ruan," Xiuqin said, "this is Martial Uncle Mo's spiritual beast." Ruan Mingzhu's voice rose slightly. "Really? What kind of spiritual beast is it? How come I've never seen it before?" Qingqi answered, "This is a feifei. Martial Uncle Emo found it in the Eastern Sea. It's very rare." "Feifei?" Ruan Mingzhu obviously hadn't heard of it. She said happily, "It looks like a raccoon, its whole body is golden, so cute." Feifei's appearance could be loved by all women. Its whole body was golden without a single strand of hair of other colors. It had round eyes, a pointed tail and short limbs. It was also very intelligent. Even Xiaohua from back then couldn't compare to it in terms of cuteness. When Emo Chenga brought Feifei home, Qin, Qi, Shu Hua and the others came to look at it from time to time. Feifei had a gentle temperament and didn't get angry when they teased it, so it was very lovable. However, they knew Emo Chenga attached great importance to this spiritual beast, so even if they were teasing it, they were still careful. Now they cautiously reminded her, "Senior Martial Sister Ruan, Feifei is a second-rank spiritual beast." "Of course I saw it." Ruan Mingzhu answered unhappily. After a while she said, "This is Martial Uncle Mo's? Where is she?" When she called Martial Uncle Emo, she was very reluctant. When she asked where she was, she didn't seem to respect her at all. Qingqi said, "Martial Uncle Emo is in Mingxin residence. Senior Martial Sister Ruan, do you want to pay a visit?" "Pay a visit?" Ruan Mingzhu seemed to dislike this word. After a while she finally said, "All right." Emo Chenga thought Ruan Mingzhu would let Xiuqin and Qingqi come in to report, but in the end the door of Mingxin residence was immediately knocked open. Eldest young Miss Ruan Mingzhu directly walked in with Feifei in her arms. Emo Chenga frowned. She saw Feifei in her arms. With a single thought, Feifei immediately broke free, jumped out of Ruan Mingzhu's arms and ran towards her. "Eh!" Ruan Mingzhu shouted, "Why are you running?" She was about to chase after her. Emo Chenga held Feifei with a faint gaze. "Is there a problem?" Seeing Feifei jumping into Emo Chenga's arms and ignoring her, Ruan Mingzhu glared at her angrily for a while before she finally remembered her master. She slightly curbed her sloppiness and said, "Martial Uncle Emo, can you give me this Feifei?" Although it was a question, from the way she addressed Feifei to the content, there wasn't the slightest sincerity. From beginning to end she didn't even salute. Emo Chenga said, "This is my contractual spiritual beast. I'm afraid I can't." Upon hearing her refusal and seeing her cold attitude, Ruan Mingzhu immediately raised her brows and shouted, "Then cancel the contract." Emo Chenga still had no expression, but Xiuqin and Qingqi cried out in alarm, "Senior Martial Sister Ruan." In Kunwu, spiritual beasts generally recognized their masters before they were hatched. This kind of contract usually couldn't be cancelled in their entire lives. If they wanted to cancel it, the master's blood essence would be damaged. Ruan Mingzhu didn't know that the contract between her and Feifei was a subordinate contract and not a master recognition contract, but she said it as if it was a matter of course. Unexpectedly, she didn't care about Feifei's loss at all. Ruan Mingzhu, on the other hand, was completely unaware of this and continued to ask, "How is it? Did you promise me?" Emo Chenga wrinkled her brows and said slowly, "Feifei doesn't give it away." "You?" Upon hearing what she said, Ruan Mingzhu's expression changed greatly. Perhaps because she recalled that things were no longer the same as before, her expression changed for a long time, but in the end she endured it and said, "Martial Uncle Emo, if you give me your spiritual beast, I'll ask Grandmaster to compensate you, okay?" Her tone made the three people raise their eyebrows. Qingqi couldn't bear it anymore and shouted, "Senior Martial Sister Ruan, Grandmaster always grants Martial Uncle Emo every request. Whatever Martial Uncle wants, you only need to tell Grandmaster." These words, however, had the intention of showing off. Whatever martial uncle wanted he could just ask Grandmaster. Why did he need her to ask? Ruan Mingzhu's expression changed. Qingqi's words obviously put her in a difficult position. She originally wanted to endure it, but in the end she couldn't hold it anymore and said angrily, Grandmaster has always doted on me. Isn't it just because I wasn't here for 60 years? You actually dare to look down on me? What's the big deal about a disciple who came in halfway? Do you think she's more important than me? The corners of Mo Chenga's lips curled up. She was very clear about her master's attitude. In terms of importance, she indeed couldn't compare to Ruan Mingzhu in her master's heart. However, her master wasn't an unreasonable and biased person who didn't care what Ruan Mingzhu said. Besides, her master had clearly given up on her now, so how could he still indulge her? This Ruan Mingzhu. She was already more than 100 years old, but she still had this kind of personality. She really didn't know where she'd been living all this time. Xiuqin and Qingqi didn't answer. It wasn't appropriate for two maids to say this kind of thing. However, they also didn't want to swallow their anger, so their gazes kept sweeping over Mo Chenga. Finally, Mo Chenga opened her mouth, living up to everyone's expectations. She said slowly, Martial nephew Ruan, I won't give this spiritual beast to anyone. If you want it, go and ask your grandmaster yourself. Ruan Mingzhu originally called her Martial Uncle Mo, out of reluctance. Now that she heard Mo Chenga calling her Martial nephew Ruan, as if it was a matter of course, she was extremely annoyed. Moreover, when she heard Mo Chenga stubbornly refusing to give Feifei to her anger burned even more fiercely. You, Ruan Mingzhu glared at her for a while then said angrily, don't regret this. She then turned around and walked away. Seeing Ruan Mingzhu leaving in anger, Xiuqin and Qingqi both looked as if their hatred had been vented. However, they heard Mo Chenga say slowly, you two, the 16 of you can stop worrying. Don't think of using me to deal with her so you can vent your anger. Shangqing Palace's affairs have never been concealed from you. I'll also be honest, she won't be staying here for long, so for Master's sake, don't trouble her anymore. Is it really necessary to deal with someone who's already been abandoned by Master? Chapter 231. Grand Master. Ruan Mingzhu ran into the main hall of Shangqing Palace, crying. Lord Daoist Jinghe was joking with a smile, but when he saw her coming in, his expression disappeared and he said faintly, what happened? With tears in her eyes, Ruan Mingzhu said, Grandmaster, I didn't do it on purpose. I just thought Martial Uncle Mo's spiritual beast was very interesting, so I wanted to ask her for it. I didn't want to make her angry. Lord Daoist Jinghe slowly frowned. And then? Ruan Mingzhu lowered her head to hide the hatred in her eyes. Martial Uncle Mo seemed very angry. Ruan Mingzhu looked up and saw Lord Daoist Jinghe sitting on the dragon chair leisurely picking up a cup of tea. Mingzhu. She didn't understand Grandmaster's attitude. Lord Daoist Jinghe looked at her indifferently. Tiange always treasures the things around her. Although you want a spiritual beast, she views it as a partner, so she's unwilling to give it to you. Ruan Mingzhu was stunned. She didn't expect Grandmaster to react like this. Lord Daoist Jinghe continued to say, if you have nothing else to do, go back and cultivate. You're not young anymore, you still have several decades. If you can't form your gold core, it'll be difficult in the future. Ruan Mingzhu was startled when he suddenly mentioned core formation. Grandmaster, don't you want to form your gold core? Lord Daoist Jinghe looked at her with a sharp gaze. How can I form my gold core if I have so many things in my heart? Tiange is much younger than you and she wandered from place to place when she was young. She's already in the late stage of the foundation building realm now and will soon reach the peak stage of the foundation building realm. What about you? I've personally taught you since you were a child. You succeeded in building your foundation at the age of 21, so you should be a proud child. Why are you still in the middle stage of the foundation building realm now that you're more than 170 years old? What have you been doing for the past 60 years? Why haven't you made any progress? Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression became stern. Ruan Mingzhu's heart trembled and she stuttered, Grandmaster, the spirit vein in Mount Yingang is too lousy. Cultivating there has no effect at all? Really? Lord Daoist Jinghe still looked at her like that. What about the medicinal pills I sent you all these years? Although I didn't call you back, Grandmaster has never deducted your portion. Even if you forcefully eat medicinal pills, 60 years should be enough for you to reach the peak of the middle stage, right? Ruan Mingzhu lowered her head, not saying anything. Lord Daoist Jinghe's expression softened again. He said softly, all right, don't think about unrelated matters. Cultivate properly. This time, the sect has summoned the disciples back to the mountain for something important. If you can do it well, it will only be beneficial to you. Ruan Mingzhu was silent for a long time before she finally answered honestly. I understand, Grandmaster. When she rushed out of Shangqing Palace, Ruan Mingzhu's face was completely red. She saw the gatekeeping disciple looking at her with a probing expression and a hidden hostility in his eyes, so she said angrily, "What are you looking at?" Being berated by her, the disciple retracted his gaze. He didn't scold her back, but a look of disdain appeared on his face. Just as Ruan Mingzhu was about to lose her temper, she remembered this was the entrance of Shangqing Palace, so she clenched her teeth and endured it. With a wave of her hand, she tossed her flying magic tool into the air. Seeing her leave, the disciple who was guarding the door let out a soft harumph and mumbled, "She really thinks she's something." Ruan Mingzhu flew to an uninhabited mountaintop. After looking at it for quite a while, she finally confirmed that was her destination. She landed on the ground and walked towards the well-hidden cave abode. Senior brother, are you there? Mingzhu. She called out twice, but she didn't hear a reply for a long time, so she continued to call out, Senior brother, come out and meet me. Mingzhu. After another long while, the door of the cave finally opened. She was overjoyed. Just as she was about to rush out, she was startled and her expression darkened. Who are you? The person who opened the door and came out was Yi Jinji. When he saw Ruan Mingzhu, he was also stunned. Who are you? Ruan Mingzhu's expression darkened. She looked inside and asked, Where's my senior brother? Yi Jinji touched his head then said strangely, Are you new here? Did you come to the wrong place? This is my senior brother's cave. Ruan Mingzhu glared at him. Brat, who are you? Why are you in my senior brother's cave? You're not my aunt. How could there be a senior brother of yours here? Although Yi Jinji had a good temper, since the other party's tone was so harsh, he didn't hold back. You should quickly leave. Although my master is amiable, he'll also get angry if someone is so rude. Master? Ruan Mingzhu stuck her head out to take a look. A hint of a smile finally appeared on her face. You're my senior brother's disciple, right? Tell him I'm Mingzhu, he'll know. Seeing that Yi Jinji didn't move, Ruan Mingzhu shouted again, Quickly go. She really didn't hold back when she ordered people around. Yi Jinji was an honest man, so he didn't get angry. He merely frowned and said, Who's your senior brother? My master's cultivating. He'll get angry if you disturb him for no reason. Just as Ruan Mingzhu was about to get angry, she heard a familiar voice coming from inside the cave. Jinji let her in. Ruan Mingzhu was delighted. Senior martial brother. She then rushed into the cave. Hey! Yi Jinji became even more confused upon seeing her like this. Who in the world was she? After Master, didn't Grandmaster only accept my aunt as his disciple? Where did this person pop out from and call Master, senior martial brother? However, since Master said so, it wasn't good for him to say anything. He closed the cave then slowly walked back to the hall. After thinking for a moment, he didn't go back to his own cultivation room. Instead, he sat next to Xiaohua, who was curled into a ball and cultivating, pretending to look after the spiritual beast. In fact, Xiaohua was already a third-rank spiritual beast. Its cultivation level was always higher than his, so it didn't need him to look after it. During this time, Xiaohua had been immersed in cultivating. Master said it seemed it was going to make a realm breakthrough again, so he didn't send it back. The door to his master's cultivation room wasn't closed. Yi Jinji pricked up his ears to listen to the movements inside. Senior martial brother. Ruan Mingzhu was extremely excited to see Qin Shi. She rushed towards him with tears in her eyes. Senior martial brother, I finally get to see you again. Qin Shi, who was still cultivating, opened his eyes and faintly glanced at her. Mingzhu, whether it's in terms of cultivation level or seniority, you should call me martial uncle instead of senior martial brother. Ruan Mingzhu was stunned for a moment, then a sad expression appeared on her face. What? Why are you and Grandmaster treating me so coldly when I finally come back? It's been 60 years, can't you two forgive me? These are two different things. Qin Shi's tone was still cold, almost devoid of any emotion. In the past we were young, so we let you call me whatever you want. But times are different now. You and I aren't children anymore, you should understand what you should do. But senior martial brother will always be my senior martial brother in my heart. Ruan Mingzhu blurted out, if my father wasn't Grandmaster's disciple and Grandmaster didn't accept me as his disciple, we'd be fellow apprentices. But that's the truth, Qin Shi said. It's been 60 years, yet you still haven't understood this principle. Don't blame Master for treating you coldly. Although his tone was calm, his words weren't polite at all. Ruan Mingzhu was stunned again. All of a sudden, she lowered her head and cried bitterly. After crying for a while, she said while sobbing, I really don't understand. I don't understand what I did wrong. Why are you and Grandmaster treating me like this? Didn't I just injure a disciple? We weren't the only ones fighting in the school and that person was fine. You and Grandmaster left me alone in Yingang branch. That place was so remote and everyone ignored me. I lived a very bitter life there. If she was crying and complaining in front of Lord Daoist Jinghe, she might have received some words of comfort. However, the person who was listening to her was Qin Shi. He was expressionless, as if the person crying in front of him was a wooden person, and he himself was also a wooden person. Ruan Mingzhu couldn't cry anymore, so she could only wipe her tears. With reddened eyes, she looked at him and pleaded softly, Senior Martial Brother, I finally came back. Can you ask Grandmaster not to drive me away? I won't cause trouble again. I'll listen to you in the future, okay? Qin Shi didn't say anything. It was as if he didn't hear anything. Ruan Mingzhu waited for a while but she couldn't help but say, Senior Martial Brother, did you forget? When you first came you always stayed in the back mountain alone. Every time, it was me who went to look for you before you were willing to come back. Speaking of the past, Qin Shi's gaze finally moved. Ruan Mingzhu thought he would soften his heart, but she still heard his cold voice. What's the use of saying this? If you were the Mingzhu from back then, how could Master let you go to the branch alone and not let you come back for 60 years? Ruan Mingzhu was dumbfounded. She said anxiously, Senior Martial Brother, don't you have any feelings for me now? We grew up together for almost 100 years. Don't you have any feelings for me? Qin Shi stared at her and said quietly, I told you long ago that I only have the great Tao in my eyes. I don't think anything else is important. I don't have the things you want, so why do you have to force me? Senior Martial Brother. Ruan Mingzhu shouted. She stared blankly at his wooden expression, and tears rolled down from her eyes. I don't want you to respond to me. I only want you to be like before, to call me affectionately, to give me pointers on my cultivation, to chat with me when you're free. Is this also too much? Ruan Mingzhu's tone was sorrowful when she said this. There was no arrogance or despotism, there was only the pain of not being able to get what she wanted. Qin Shi suddenly felt pain. He felt like a certain part of him was touched. But he soon calmed down and said with a calm voice, Mingzhu, you still don't think you're wrong? Ruan Mingzhu lowered her head then angrily shook her head. Isn't it just injuring a disciple? For us cultivators, what's the big deal about injuring one or two people? Haven't you and Grandmaster killed a lot of people? I still haven't. It's not because you injured someone. Qin Shi interrupted her. You should strive to get what you can, but you should give up what you can't get. Because you can't get what you want, you vent your anger on others and even attack your fellow disciples. Don't you think your state of mind is already twisted? Master indulges you too much. Indulges you so much that you want everything, but how can you get everything in this world? If you didn't have Master, what could you get? His tone was very flat, but the meaning behind his words was very strict. He stared at Ruan Mingzhu without the slightest fluctuation in his gaze. Mingzhu, I'm not Master. I won't teach you what's right and what's wrong, but I know that you and I are two different people. Even if we grew up together, we still can't walk together in the end. Don't be stubborn. Chapter 232. Ruan Mingzhu silently walked out of Qin Shi's Immortal's cave then flew back to Shanqing Palace without saying a single word. At this point he had already said what he wanted to say. Anything else was meaningless. As soon as she walked out of the cave, Yi Jinji impatiently rushed into the cultivation room. Master. Qin Shi sat cross-legged, maintaining his cultivation posture. He didn't even open his eyes. Have you heard enough? Yi Jinji scratched his head then chuckled. I wasn't eavesdropping. I just happened to see Xiaohua. I didn't say you were eavesdropping. Qin Shi opened his eyes and cast an indifferent glance at him before lowering his gaze again. What are you feeling guilty about? Yi Jinji didn't know what to say, so he could only step forward. Master, who's this? Why did she call you senior brother? Didn't Grandmaster only accept Aunt as his disciple after you? Qin Shi said, she's your martial uncle Qingyuan's daughter. Her name's Ruan Mingzhu. According to reason, you should call her senior martial sister. After he finished speaking, he looked up at Yi Jinji. What else do you want to know? Just say it directly, there's no need to hide it. I still want to know what's going on with this senior sister. Did she like Master? What did she do this time? Why didn't Grandmaster let her come back? This pile of questions made Qinshi silent for quite a while. Yi Jinji waited for a while, but he didn't hear any reply, so he called out again, Master? Qinshi stopped his mind wandering and slowly said, Mingzhu is my playmate since childhood. When I was brought to Mount Taikang by your martial ancestor, I was only 8 years old, and Mingzhu was only 5 or 6 years old at that time. Her father, your martial uncle Qingyuan, had passed away. Your martial ancestor took pity on her, so he brought her with him. At that time, Mingzhu was actually a very cute little girl. I had an eccentric personality and didn't like to interact with others. Mingzhu was afraid that I would be lonely and would always pull me to play with her. I have always treated her as a younger sister. Because of senior martial brother Qingyin, my master treats Mingzhu even better than he treats me. Master had very high expectations of me, but to Mingzhu, no matter what she wanted, Master would give it to her. Then, at some point in time, Mingzhu slowly changed. When we grew up and built our foundation, Mingzhu started to become unreasonable, overbearing and paranoid. After I built my foundation, I often went out. When I returned to the mountain, I closed my door and cultivated. I didn't have much contact with her, so I didn't know her personality would become so terrifying. Later on, when I reached core formation, Master bestowed me with another immortal's cave, so I moved out of Shangqing Palace. At that time I was still too young. I was so engrossed in cultivation that I didn't want to take any disciples. If there were any chores, I would pick a few from the disciples of my senior brothers and sisters to do. I don't know why Mingzhu always makes things difficult for these disciples. Occasionally I would bump into her and scold her a few times. She would agree to it, but the next time it would be even worse. She did it again and again, and I gradually disliked her. Upon hearing this, Yi Jinji couldn't help but interrupt. Master, at that time, did you know senior martial sister Wan liked you? Hearing such a straightforward question, Qinshi raised his head and glared at him. You still remember that I'm your master? Yi Jinji chuckled. Master, I'm just telling the truth. Anyone with eyes can see that senior martial sister Wan likes you, so you don't have to feel embarrassed. Qinshi frowned. Brat, who did you learn to talk so much? I remember that your aunt doesn't like to talk. Yi Jinji said, it's because both aunt and you don't like to talk that I have to talk a lot. Otherwise, how boring would it be? He then changed the topic again. Master, did you know or not? Qinshi had no choice but to say, at first I didn't know. Later, I heard her talking to someone else, so I learned about it. Then Master, what was your reaction at that time? What reaction? Qinshi was indifferent. Since I wouldn't respond to her, I naturally didn't know. Yi Jinji looked at Qinshi's face and studied it for a long time before he said, Master, the person who likes you is really unlucky. Qinshi still looked indifferent. Even if she's unlucky, it's none of my business. Are you done asking? No. Yi Jinji immediately shouted, Master, then why hasn't senior martial sister Ruan been around for the past 60 years? What did she do to hurt others? Faced with these endless questions, Qinshi sighed. If it was someone else, he wouldn't answer and would just drive them out. But this was his disciple, his only disciple. He was also wondering if he was too good to Jinji, that this brat didn't have any sense of seniority in his eyes. Although he thought so, he still answered the question. At that time, a female disciple under your Grandmaster Shenin was working in my immortal's cave. Mingzhu was jealous, so she took advantage of my absence and attacked that disciple, severely injuring her. Killing fellow disciples is strictly prohibited by the school rules, but the reason was such a trivial matter, so your Grandmaster was furious and personally punished Mingzhu. But Mingzhu didn't repent, so your Grandmaster ordered her to leave Mount Taikang and go to a remote courtyard. Unless she was summoned, she wasn't allowed to come back. After he finished speaking, Qinshi cast him a sidelong glance. It's fine if you've heard this, but you're not allowed to spread it. Yi Jinji cleverly promised, of course. I've always followed Master's orders. As he spoke, a spiritual beast whose whole body was fiery red walked in noiselessly. A Xiaohua. Yi Jinji picked it up. Aren't you advancing? Why are you still in the 3rd rank? Xiaohua squeaked. Qinshi looked at it, then said, it failed its advancement. Advancing was never easy, even if Xiaohua had eaten a lot of medicinal pills these years. Yi Jinji's eyes shifted. Master, since Xiaohua finished its advancement, should I take it back? Qinshi closed his eyes and pretended to continue cultivating. If you want to go, then go quickly. Yi Jinji didn't say anything else. He carried Xiaohua and slipped out of the cave, flying toward Shangqing Palace while muttering, such an interesting thing. I must tell Auntie. Unfortunately, after he sent Xiaohua back and excitedly mentioned it to her, Mo Chenga only replied with one sentence, "I know." Yi Xinji's eyes widened. "Any where did you know?" Mo Chenga looked at him amusedly. "Did you forget? This Shangqing palace has 16 old aunts and 6 old women." "Oh." Yi Xinji scratched his head. "That's true. Xuqin and the others are so bored every day, so they should have found out long ago." Mo Chenga looked down at Xiaohua in her arms and was a bit surprised. "This is Xiaohua? It became like this after advancing?" The original Xiaohua didn't have such beautiful fur. With its current appearance, it didn't look like the inferno beast that could be seen everywhere in Kunwu. Yi Xinji said, "I also don't know why it became like this. When Xiaohua advanced to the 3rd rank, it seemed to have become a different spiritual beast. Master said it might have mutated." "Mutated? And?" Yi Xinji also didn't seem to understand. "Master said Xiaohua ate something so its physique is different from ordinary inferno beast. I'm not very clear about the rest." Mo Chenga seemed to be lost in thought. Xiaohua was always thrown into the virtual sky world by her, so it must have eaten some messy spiritual medicine inside to mutate. Squeak squeak. A ball of golden fur appeared at the door of Mingxin residence. When it saw the red fur in Mo Chenga's hands, it immediately ran over and jumped, trying to take back its position. Mo Chenga reached out and grabbed Fei Fei with her other hand to avoid trampling on Xiaohua. When Xiaohua saw this ball of golden light, it immediately stood up in Mo Chenga's arms and widened its eyes. Upon seeing this, Yi Xinji called out, "Auntie, what's this?" "This is Fei Fei." Mo Chenga watched as the 2 spiritual beasts looked at each other curiously. Then Xiaohua took a step forward, wanting to occupy more space. Fei Fei, unwilling to be outdone, also stood up. The 2 spiritual beasts, one golden and one red, stared at each other in an unfriendly manner. They're going to fight? Yi Xinji, who was excited to see the 2 spiritual beasts kill each other, was glared at by Mo Chenga. Xiaohua stared at Fei Fei for a while. Perhaps because its cultivation level was higher than Fei Fei's and it shouldn't lose its demeanor, it held its head high, jumped down from Mo Chenga's arms and barked at Fei Fei. Fei Fei was delighted to see it jump down on its own, but when it saw Xiaohua's provocative look, it understood and also stared at Xiaohua. Xiaohua stretched out its paw and scratched the air, seemingly threatening it. Fei Fei stared at it for a while, then also jumped down from Mo Chenga's arms to confront Xiaohua. The 2 spiritual beasts stared at each other and circled each other, seemingly choosing where to attack. Yi Xinji, who was very excited, asked, "Auntie, is this also your spiritual beast? What kind of abilities does it have? Can it beat Xiaohua?" Mo Chenga was hesitating whether she, as the master, should go and mediate the fight, but when she heard Yi Xinji's question, she thought for a while and said, "Fei Fei's ability is special. I don't think I've seen it fight." In Bishuan court, she heard that Fei Fei's generally didn't have any attack power, but they had strange abilities that prevented demonic beasts from taking the initiative to attack them. But what she saw now was clearly Xiaohua provoking Fei Fei, so how would Fei Fei respond? As for Xiaohua, it advanced to the 3rd rank and mutated. It should have a special ability, right? The 2 spiritual beasts didn't know their unscrupulous master deliberately wanted to see them fight each other. After circling around for a while, Xiaohua made the first move. It breathed sun-real fire from its mouth, burning Fei Fei's golden fur. It could be imagined that if this fire burned Fei Fei's golden fur, it would turn into charcoal. After all, this was sun-real fire, which could be used to calcine all kinds of spiritual plants and objects. There were very few that couldn't be melted. Nevertheless, Fei Fei nimbly leaped up, avoiding the extreme fire-real fire. It shouted, then raised its paw, releasing a misty ray of light from its palm which shone on Xiaohua's head. Then Xiaohua stopped casting its technique. Its head slowly drooped and its eyes started to become blurry. Yi Xinji said in surprise, "Bewitching technique?" Upon hearing his voice, Xiaohua sobered up from its daze. It glared at Fei Fei and growled angrily. It then waved its paw and once again pounced on Fei Fei with sun-real fire. Fei Fei was startled. It raised its head to cast a glance at Yi Xinji, then turned around and ran. The 2 spiritual beasts, one in front and one behind, started chasing each other in the courtyard. Water splashed everywhere from the front of the house to the back, and the medicinal fields were trampled into a mess. "Auntie." Upon seeing this, Yi Xinji hurriedly said, the spiritual plants are ruined." Mo Chenga was very interested in watching. If they're ruined, then they're ruined. Xiaohua was obviously much more ferocious than before. Although Fei Fei's cultivation level wasn't as high as Xiaohua's, Its bewitching technique was quite special. Chapter 233. The two spiritual beasts caused a huge ruckus, trampling on Mingxin residents to an outrageous degree. Xiuqin and Qingqi, who lived nearby, ran over to take a look. Their faces turned green. Martial Uncle Mo. She was here, but they were the ones cleaning up Mingxin residents. Mo Qianga raised her hand to stop them. Wait a minute. Xiuqin stomped her foot. If we wait any longer, the house will be burned. What Xiaohua sprayed was sun-real fire, so the fence was already burning. Mo Qianga never liked to deliberately torment others. Seeing Xiuqin and Qingqi anxiously running around in circles, she felt bored, but she still used her divine comprehension to call back the two spiritual beasts. Feifei had a contract with her, but Xiaohua had a mysterious connection with Mo Qianga because of the virtual sky world. Now that Xiaohua received her divine comprehension, it fiercely chased after her for a while. When it saw Feifei jumping into her arms, it wagged its tail, ran over, and lay on her lap motionlessly. Okay, you two can't fight in the future. You have to be as close as brothers, understand? As she lectured them, she took out 2 medicinal pills and fed them. She thought maybe she should also establish a spiritual beast contract with Xiaohua. Feifei didn't care about it. It ate countless spiritual plants and spiritual medicines in the virtual sky world these days, so it just happily took her medicinal pills. Xiaohua's eyes widened when it saw the medicinal pills. Unexpectedly, Mo Qianga hadn't been back for more than 20 years, so its medicinal pills had long been finished. After feeding Xiaohua several medicinal pills, she watched as Xiaohua ran into the living room, found a corner, and curled up to cultivate. She then turned around and asked Yizhenji, "When did Xiaohua make a realm breakthrough?" Yizhenji thought for a while, then said, "About 15 years ago, when I was about to finish feeding it medicinal pills." "Then how come it's already in the peak of the 3rd rank now?" Mo Qianga was puzzled. If it finished its medicinal pills, it shouldn't be able to cultivate so fast, right? Yizhenji answered, "I told Master about this and he never forgot to concoct medicinal pills for Xiaohua all these years." Mo Qianga thought for a while, then asked in surprise, "Did you show Xiaohua's medicinal pills to your master?" And, upon hearing Yizhenji's answer, Mo Qianga became anxious. "Didn't I tell you that the medicinal pills I gave you, whether it's for you or Xiaohua, can't be shown to other people?" Upon seeing her furrowing her brows, Yizhenji was alarmed. "Auntie, it wasn't me who showed it to Master. It was Master who saw Xiaohua eating medicinal pills, so he took it over to have a look." However, he was still puzzled. Master didn't do anything after he saw it, so what happened? Did your master see anything? Mo Qianga calmed down and cast a glance at Xiuqin and Qingqi, who were busy tidying up the medicinal fields. They didn't pay any attention to her at all. "What did he say? Tell me his reaction in detail." Although Yizhenji was puzzled, he still explained everything in detail. "Master looked at that medicinal pill for a long time. I was also worried that something might have gone wrong, but in the end, Master only said that he also knew how to concoct this medicinal pill. He also said he'd let him study this pill and that he'd return the bottle to me. He is my master, how could I dare to say no? Moreover, Master didn't say anything was wrong, so I felt relieved." At this point, Yizhenji asked cautiously, "Auntie, what's the problem with the medicinal pills in the end? Can't we let others know?" Mo Qianga broke out in a cold sweat. What should she say? Luo Fengxue once said that senior martial brother Shoujing's pill concocting skills were the best in Clear Spring Peak. Even Master couldn't compare to him, so how could he not see that there was something wrong with that medicinal pill? That medicinal pill was only an ordinary beast spirit pill for spiritual beasts, but its ingredients were spiritual plants that were at least 1,000 years old. Who would use a 1,000-year-old spiritual plant to concoct a beast spirit pill? Ordinary people could only use it for a few dozen years at most, or 100 years at most. She took a deep breath and tried hard to calm herself down. "Then did he ever see the medicinal pills you took?" Yizhenji answered, "No. Although Master was curious why my aptitude wasn't high but my cultivation speed was fast, he didn't ask me about it." Mo Qianga sighed in relief, then cautiously reminded him again, "Remember, no matter what medicinal pills I give you in the future, you mustn't let others see them, not even if it's an accident like this." Although Yizhenji didn't understand, he still nodded in the end. "I understand." He thought for a moment, then asked worriedly, "Auntie, will it be okay if Master finds out?" Mo Qianga shook her head. "You should go back first. Let Auntie think about it." "Oh." Yizhenji obediently left. Mo Qianga stared at his back with a gloomy expression. The secret of the virtual sky world must never be known by others, not even by her master, who treated her like his own son. Who in the cultivation world could resist the temptation of a garden full of spiritual plants? Not even deification cultivators. But did he know? Mo Chenga wasn't sure at all. If he knew, did master know? Thinking about this possibility, she began to sweat. Carefully thinking about what happened after she came back, master seemed very normal. He didn't show any special emotions, and Xiuqin and the others were also very normal. Presumably, even if that person realized something was wrong, he still hadn't told master, right? In addition, seeing a medicinal pill couldn't explain more problems. Maybe he just had doubts in his heart. After all, who could guess the truth? But no matter what, it wasn't a good thing if this matter was leaked. After thinking for a while, Mo Chenga stood up and decided to probe that master's intentions. Just as she stepped out of Mingxin residence, she saw a person standing there. It was that martial nephew Ruan. Mo Chenga already knew she was outside, so she didn't bother to greet her. She just pretended she didn't see anything and walked forward. In any case, Ruan Mingzhu as a junior should be the one to greet her first. Ruan Mingzhu did greet her, but the tone of her greeting was really unpleasant. Stop. Mo Chenga thought for a moment, then stopped obediently. Martial nephew Ruan, what's the matter? Ruan Mingzhu's expression changed. In the end, she asked, what's the relationship between you and that boy? Which boy? Mo Chenga raised her eyebrows. Ruan Mingzhu stamped her feet. The boy who just went out. My senior martial brother's disciple. Your senior martial brother's disciple? Mo Chenga shook her head inwardly. In any case, Jinji is my senior martial brother's disciple, right? Although she thought so, she still looked calm on the surface. You mean Jinji? He's my nephew. What's wrong? Is there a problem? Your nephew. Ruan Mingzhu's expression was unsightly. How could he be your nephew? Mo Chenga thought it was funny, so she smiled. Why can't he be my nephew? Martial nephew Ruan, you're meddling too much. When she said the words, martial nephew Ruan, she deliberately emphasized her tone to remind this arrogant woman that she was her master's proper disciple. You, Ruan Mingzhu was infuriated, but her lips trembled and she couldn't say anything. Since she promised her master she wouldn't cause trouble for her, Mo Chenga didn't want to continue provoking her, so she said, I still have something to do, so I can't chat with you, martial nephew. Right after she said that, she left Ruan Mingzhu behind and minded her own business. Ruan Mingzhu didn't know whether she was angry or bitter, but she just stood there motionlessly. When she reached the main hall of Shangqing Palace, Lord Daoist Jinghe was leaning against the wall with his eyes closed. There wasn't a single maid around him. Mo Chenga walked towards him. Master. Lord Daoist Jinghe opened his eyes, then closed them again. Is something the matter? It's nothing. I just haven't been back for more than 20 years, so I wanted to chat with master. The corners of Lord Daoist Jinghe's lips curled up into a smile. Did Mingzhu provoke you? Mo Chenga shook her head. Even if she provoked me, I'd pretend I didn't see it. She's just a child who can't grow up. What's the point of bickering with her? Upon hearing what she said, Lord Daoist Jinghe's eyes revealed a sad yet gratified expression. In the end, I didn't lead you astray, Mo Chenga chuckled, then asked, Master, I find it strange, why is she so fixated on senior martial brother Shoujing? With senior martial brother's temperament, it's fine if it's other people, but to her, wouldn't senior martial brother's personality be boring? Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled bitterly. How could she really like him? It's just that she can't get him, so she wholeheartedly wants him. I can only blame myself for spoiling her like this. She must get whatever she wants. Finally, there's one thing she can't get with great difficulty, so she fell into a demonic barrier. Speaking up to this point, he thought in his heart, wasn't that brat also like this in the beginning? If he hadn't encountered that deification cultivator, he probably wouldn't have this kind of thought about Mo Chenga. At most, he would only have a slightly favorable impression of her, right? However, two deification cultivators suddenly appeared in front of him, causing his favorable impression to fall through, so he became obsessed. The more he couldn't get her, the deeper his obsession became, and in the end he fell into a demonic barrier. As for what that brat liked about Mo Chenga, he probably couldn't say it himself. It turned out he only admired her, paid attention to her, and was only curious about her. If there were no other factors, maybe he would have been like this in this lifetime. Or maybe, after several hundred years, this kind of feeling would have slowly faded. However, something like that happened again, causing him to fall into his own psychological trap. The more he couldn't get her, the more he paid attention to her. The more he thought about her, the more he couldn't bear to part with her. Some feelings couldn't be counted clearly, and some feelings didn't even have a beginning. Mo Chinga was scared by Lord Daoist Jinghe's gaze, and that terrifying thought appeared again. Does Master really know? Is this a test? After a long time, Lord Daoist Jinghe withdrew his gaze. Don't worry about Mingzhu. When this matter is over, let her return to the branch courtyard. She can't stay here anymore. Mo Chinga breathed a sigh of relief. His tone didn't have any abnormalities. She thought for a while, then asked, Master, is Senior Martial Brother Shoujing going to form his nascent soul soon? When this matter was brought up, Lord Daoist Jinghe looked worried and hesitated a bit. He's already in the peak stage of the core formation realm, and the materials for forming his nascent soul have long been prepared. According to reason, he can indeed enter closed-door meditation to form his nascent soul. Seeing that Lord Daoist Jinghe looked worried, Mo Chinga couldn't help but ask, Does Master think there's a problem? It's hard to say. Lord Daoist Jinghe shook his head. I always feel this brat will encounter a big problem when he forms his nascent soul, but he's determined and can't be stopped. A big problem? Mo Chinga thought silently. Master has long said he's too anxious, but why didn't he have this kind of problem before? What's the reason that makes his mental state have a problem that even Master thinks is difficult to deal with? Fine, I'll let him form his nascent soul. Lord Daoist Jinghe said faintly, but the worry in his eyes didn't fade away. That child has always been stubborn, and he's always had his own ideas. If we don't let him go, I'm afraid he himself won't be reconciled. When he fails, he'll naturally deal with it. Chapter 234. Failure? I haven't even started forming my nascent soul, but Master already thinks I'll fail? Mo Chinga was speechless for a long time. She couldn't explain her feelings. After a long time she said, Master, when I met the two deification seniors, I got a batch of spiritual plants that were several thousand years old. Because I couldn't use them with my current realm, I kept them. If Senior Martial Brother Shoujing needs them, he might as well use them to concoct medicinal pills. I think they'll help him form his nascent soul. Lord Daoist Jinghe looked up at her with an inexplicable expression in his eyes. Several thousand years old spiritual plants? A batch? Nowadays, spiritual plants over 1,000 years old aren't easy to get. Are you willing to give them to me? Mo Chinga chuckled. Ever since I came to Shenqing School, the school has never been stingy with the disciples they give me. It can be said that most of the treasures I have now come from the school. If I didn't have a school and a master, I'd be nothing. If Master thinks it's necessary, I'm naturally willing to give them to you. Oh. Lord Daoist Jinghe looked disappointed or gratified. He thought for a while and shook his head. No need. That brat has always been cautious. I've also examined him and I've prepared more than enough. If he still fails, it can only be said that his luck is bad. Besides, you should also prepare for your core formation. I remember that your pill concocting skills are also passable, right? Mo Chinga hesitated. Disciples' pill concocting skills are mediocre. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled. Girl, you're too modest. I know your pill concocting skills are definitely better than the concoctions masters in the school since you've never gone out to find a concocting master to refine pills for you. I'll prepare dustless pills and other things for you to form your gold core, but it'll take you 10 to 20 years to cultivate until you reach the peak stage of the foundation building realm. Whatever you need to prepare, do it yourself. If there's anything you can't think of, just tell me. Thank you, Master. Mo Chinga was very grateful. This master was never stingy when it came to external things. Although the school had its own rules that dustless pills and other things could be distributed to disciples in the peak stage of the foundation building realm, since Master said he'd get her more than one set. Lord Daoist Jinghe thought for a while then said, You don't have to go all out on the magic formation on the main peak. I've gone inside to explore it. It's very powerful. Although it's not life-threatening, you'll inevitably suffer some injuries. Right now it's more important for you to form your gold core, so don't get injured if you can. If you're almost there, don't advance. Otherwise the gains won't make up for the losses. Got it? After a while she asked again, Master, I want to form my gold core, so you let me travel outside first. What about Senior Martial Brother Shoujing? Why is it that after being in seclusion for more than 30 years, you still don't need to go out before forming your nascent soul? Lord Daoist Jinghe was playing with a small magic weapon in his hand. When he heard what Mo Chinga said, he raised his head and looked at her playfully. I say, why do you seem to be asking about that brat today? You weren't so nosy before. Mo Chinga's eyes shifted, but she soon said, Master, you're thinking too much. Isn't that because Jinji's following him now? If senior martial brother Shoujing can form his nascent soul, Jinji's status will rise accordingly. Really? Lord Daoist Jinghe cast her a sidelong glance. Right now, Jinji was only in the early stage of the foundation building realm. If he wanted to reach the middle stage, it would take him at least 10 to 20 years. He was very far from the core formation realm, so did he need a nascent soul master? Of course. Mo Chenga insisted. Master, quickly tell me. Lord Daoist Jinghe answered carelessly, that brat can handle everything by himself. In fact, with his mental state, forming his nascent soul shouldn't be a problem. If he didn't have a mental barrier, I wouldn't be worried. Mental barrier? It's nothing. Lord Daoist Jinghe immediately smoothed things over. The most important thing in soul formation is the inner demon. Many people simply don't realize they have an inner demon, which leads to their failure in soul formation. This brat was so impatient, so he's obviously trapped by a mental barrier. That's why I'm worried. Mo Chenga could naturally tell Lord Daoist Jinghe wasn't telling the truth. However, this was an important matter, so it was normal for him not to tell her. The most important thing was that she talked about this in a roundabout way because she wanted to see whether senior martial brother Shoujing mentioned that medicinal pill to her master. Now, it seemed her master's reaction was very normal. He probably didn't. In addition, she mentioned the 2 deification cultivators. If they asked in the future, she could explain the source of the medicinal pill's materials. With that thought in mind, she found an excuse to leave. Xiaohua just burned the medicinal fields. I'll go see if Xiuqin and the others have finished cleaning. Huh? Didn't you want to talk to Master? Why are you leaving after saying a few words? I'm done. Mo Chenga didn't even look back and walked towards the back. Lord Daoist Jinghe was left muttering, these children, each one is stranger than the other. Mo Chenga regained her cheerful mood after realizing everything was fine. She walked towards Mingxin residence, but she found Ruan Mingzhu still standing there. This woman, who Mo Chenga thought was arrogant and despotic, was currently dazed. She stared blankly at the maids bustling about inside Mingxin residence, her gaze filled with disappointment. Ruan Mingzhu seemed startled to see her coming. Seeing as she didn't seem to want to greet her, Mo Chenga didn't say anything and was about to enter Mingxin residence. Behind her, Ruan Mingzhu suddenly called out, Martial Uncle Mo. Her voice didn't contain any other emotions, so it sounded a lot cuter. Mo Chenga turned around. Martial nephew Ruan, is there something wrong? Ruan Mingzhu bit her lip. After hesitating for a long time, she finally said, Martial Uncle Mo, would you like to come to my Jili building? Mo Chenga was stunned. She almost thought she heard wrong. Is this really Ruan Mingzhu? When she heard me call her martial nephew Ruan, she didn't show any emotions at all and even asked me to come to her building with a slightly pleading tone. Martial Uncle Mo? Ruan Mingzhu shouted again, her pleading tone becoming stronger. They don't want to talk to me. I just want to talk to someone. Mo Chenga turned around to look at her courtyard. Xiuqin and the others were still busy. It wasn't a big deal if they got dirty, they could be fixed with a few small spells. However, the 2 spiritual beasts also trampled on the medicinal fields just now, so it would probably take some time to deal with them. She muttered to herself for a moment, then said, all right. Ruan Mingzhu was delighted to hear that. She stood up and led the way. Martial Uncle Mo, let's go. Mo Chenga followed behind her. While walking towards Jili building, she was on guard. Although she didn't think Ruan Mingzhu could do anything out of line, she was, after all, a famous domineering master who dared to do anything. Jili building wasn't far from Mingxin residence. It was also a similar small courtyard, but the things inside were much more luxurious. Ruan Mingzhu invited Mo Chenga inside, then clumsily led her into the small hall and asked her to sit down. Mo Chenga saw that Ruan Mingzhu didn't make the slightest mistake in this matter, so she was obviously well-mannered. It was just that she was used to being domineering and didn't want to do it. Seeing that Ruan Mingzhu also sat down but didn't even have a cup of tea, Mo Chenga was somewhat speechless. Although foundation building cultivators like them were above the common people, drinking tea was a kind of habit and was also the way to treat guests. Martial Uncle Mo, sitting in front of her, Ruan Mingzhu lowered her head. I've been away from the group for 60 years. The place I live in is also remote, so I don't know anything about the group. Can you tell me? Mo Chenga asked faintly, what do you want to know? Ruan Mingzhu raised her head and looked at her. For example, when did you enter the group, why Grandmaster accepted you as his disciple, and so on? Mo Chenga shook her head. I've been in the group for almost 40 years. As for why he accepted me as his disciple, you might as well ask your Grandmaster himself. Ruan Mingzhu stared at her with a strange expression. Could it be that your aptitude is extraordinary? What was your cultivation level when you entered the group? So, Mo Chenga answered perfunctorily. When I entered the group, I hadn't built my foundation yet. When I entered the group, my master bestowed me a foundation-building pill, so I succeeded in building my foundation. 40 years. Ruan Mingzhu mumbled. From the aura-refining realm to the late stage of the foundation-building realm in 40 years. Grandmaster, no wonder. Mo Chenga watched as Ruan Mingzhu's expression changed. She seemed to be struggling fiercely in her heart, so Mo Chenga said faintly, Martial nephew Ruan, everyone has their own fate, it can't be forced. What Mo Chenga said made Ruan Mingzhu suddenly lose control. She slammed the table and said loudly, Are you sure I'm inferior to you? Mo Chenga raised her head and stared coldly at her. Realizing her attitude, Ruan Mingzhu hastily smiled. Martial Uncle Mo, I'm sorry. This young lady actually knew how to apologize to others? Mo Chenga raised her brows. It's nothing. What else did Martial nephew Ruan say? If you're done, I'm going back to Mingxin residence. Martial Uncle Mo, don't go. Ruan Mingzhu begged again. I was just in a daze just now and said the wrong thing. Don't leave me alone. Mo Chenga found Ruan Mingzhu's pitiful and unconcealable jealousy and hatred very funny. Then what do you want to say? Just say it quickly. Seeing as Mo Chenga's expression softened, Ruan Mingzhu finally remembered to pour a cup of tea for her. She bustled about in a flurry before a cup of tea was delivered to Mo Chenga. Martial Uncle Mo, drink some tea. Mo Chenga nodded. She stared at the tea with a slight frown on her face. This young miss almost flipped the table over just to pour tea, but she unexpectedly couldn't even do this kind of thing. Mo Chenga couldn't help but sigh inwardly. If she were Lord Dawish Jinghe, she really wouldn't know what kind of headache she'd have. Martial Uncle Mo, Ruan Mingzhu, who was sitting across from her, said weakly with her head lowered, I really don't understand, why does everyone say I'm wrong? Fine, I'm really wrong, but why didn't they say I was wrong before? No matter what I did, Grandmaster never said I was wrong. Now that I'm saying it, he's no longer willing to pay attention to me. She looked distressed. I don't understand, I really don't understand, they're all unwilling to pay attention to me, what should I do? I've been in Yungang for 60 years. Every day I wanted to come back. Every day I waited for Grandmaster to call me back, but he never did. When the school finally sent me a summoning talisman, I came back, but they're all unwilling to pay attention to me. At this point, she buried her head in the table and started to sob. Mo Chenga watched for a while, then couldn't help but sigh. Martial nephew Ruan, have you ever thought about relying on yourself? Ruan Mingzhu stopped crying. Mo Chenga continued to say, why must master and senior martial brother Shoujing pay attention to you? In Yungang's branch courtyard, no one cared about you and no one treated you harshly, you obviously could have cultivated properly, couldn't you? Ruan Mingzhu raised her head in a daze. They're all ignoring me, what's the use of cultivating? What's the point? Mo Chenga simply didn't know what to say. Could it be that you're cultivating just to make other people pay attention to you? Ruan Mingzhu looked bewildered. Mo Chenga felt helpless and amused at the same time. This woman was obviously more than twice her age, but why did she feel like she was educating a child? Could it be that you yourself don't feel the joy of cultivating at all? Then what's your purpose in life? To just live? To act recklessly? To let master pamper you? And then wait for one day to pass away? If you don't even know what you want to do, how can you find joy in living? Chapter 235. After talking with Ruan Mingzhu, Mo Chenga couldn't sit still anymore, so she went back to Mingxin residence. Xiuqin and Qingxi moved quickly and had already tidied up the medicinal field. When Mo Chenga returned, she saw that the courtyard was empty. Xiaohua was curled up in the corner of the small hall, cultivating, and Feifei was walking back and forth around Xiaohua, looking very curious. Feifei was her contractual spiritual beast. Since she told her not to make things difficult for Xiaohua, she wouldn't do anything to it. Xiaohua was willing to let Feifei stay so close to it while cultivating, so it seemed he didn't want to hurt it. After thinking for a while, Mo Chenga closed the courtyard door, opened the defensive formation and made an illusion in her room. She then grabbed Xiaohua and Feifei and brought them into the virtual sky world. Xiaohua stopped cultivating. Seeing the virtual sky world it hadn't seen for a long time, it ran happily to look for the spiritual plants it liked in the past. Upon seeing this, Feifei hurriedly ran after it for fear that the things it liked would be taken away. The two spiritual beasts fought while running. After a while they realized the things they liked were different, so they were no longer hostile toward each other. Emo Chenga was in a daze for a while when she realized the two of them were already rolling around together. Seeing this scene, Emo Chenga couldn't help but laugh. The feelings of spiritual beasts were really simple. If they liked it, they liked it. If they hated it, they hated it. They were fighting just now, but now they were playing around. And back then Xiaohua was often left here alone by her, so it was always lonely. Now that it had Feifei, it should be happier. As she thought about it, she thought about the mess outside. The medicinal pills she concocted for Xiaohua were discovered by Qin Shoujing. Jinji had a master, that troublemaker Ruan Mingzhu, and master only said half of what he wanted to say. She rubbed the space between her eyebrows, feeling confused. Now, she was sure her master didn't know about the medicinal pills, but she wasn't sure whether that senior martial brother Shoujing suspected her or not. Anyway, she already told her master that even if he came to find her, she'd just push the blame to Zhong Muling. Speaking of which, they hadn't seen each other for more than 30 years, right? For her, it really wasn't a short period of time. Until today, she finally realized she was a sentimental person. Even after more than 30 years, she hadn't completely forgotten him. After letting her imagination run wild for a while, she shook her head, collected her thoughts, and began to cultivate. The 6th of June was not far away. Although her master said that she did not need to do her best, it was better to be prepared. With his mind focused on cultivation, a few days passed by quickly. When Xiuqin and the others came to summon her, it was already the 6th day of the 6th month. On this day, all of Shenqing School's foundation building disciples gathered on the main peak. Xiuqin and the others were no exception. Emo Chenga saw many familiar faces in the crowd. Han Qingyu, Wei Jiasi, Luo Fengxue, Yi Jingwen, Guangzhu, Zhan Bai. With such an important matter at hand, no one was in the mood to chat. They greeted each other and stood in line. Han Qingyu and the others were in the same group as Emo Chenga. Luo Fengxue leaned against Emo Chenga and chatted with her. Emo Chenga looked around and unexpectedly found Bai Yanfei in her group. After thinking for a while, she finally understood. Her group should be the one with the highest status among the foundation building cultivators. Everyone was a disciple of a nascent soul cultivator, so Bai Yanfei was naturally here. After several decades of not seeing each other, Bai Yanfei had become a lot calmer. Although he still looked arrogant, he wasn't as frivolous as before. What made Emo Chenga feel relieved was that ever since she arrived, Bai Yanfei didn't even glance at her. It seemed he no longer had any feelings for her. Interestingly, there was a young girl standing not too far from Bai Yanfei. From time to time, she would glare at him with an angry expression. However, Bai Yanfei pretended not to see anything and didn't even bat an eye. Luo Fengxue, who noticed Emo Chenga's gaze, came over and whispered, "You should know this junior martial brother Bai, but you've never seen that junior martial sister Jiang, right?" Emo Chenga also whispered, "So that's junior martial sister Jiang from Peak of Drifting Clouds. I think she's not bad. Although she's not an outstanding beauty, she's still pretty and pleasant." "Yes." Luo Fengxue chuckled. In terms of appearance, junior martial sister Jiang isn't bad. Unfortunately, her personality is similar to our senior martial sister Ruan. Although Lord Taoist Shenin had already established his own group, Luo Fengxue still called him by his old address. Emo Chenga cast a sidelong glance at the other group. Seeing that Ruan Mingzhu was in low spirits and didn't have any of her usual arrogance, she smiled and said, "It seems you really don't like that senior martial sister Ruan. It'd be strange if I liked her." Luo Fengxue curled her lips and said, "Although second senior martial sister's personality isn't good, she's never harmed people. She harmed second senior martial sister so miserably, so how could I possibly like her?" Speaking of this, Emo Chenga looked at the solemn-looking Wei Jiasi. To her surprise, Wei Jiasi also advanced to the late stage. Senior martial sister Wei made a realm breakthrough? And, Luo Fengxue said, "Senior martial sister Wei finally understands. She's already more than 100 years old now. If she doesn't strive to form her gold core as soon as possible, it'll be difficult for her in the future." At this point, Luo Fengxue asked her again, "Tienga, how did your cultivation level advance so fast? We built our foundation together, but I'm still in the early stage while you're already in the late stage. Doesn't this mean that after several decades, you'll be a whole realm higher than me?" Although she loved power, she wasn't lazy when it came to cultivating. Every day she would spend half of her time cultivating. Emo Chenga shook her head and said, "You know, right after I built my foundation, I obtained a fated chance and directly advanced to the middle stage. Now that more than 30 years have passed, it's not strange for me to advance to the late stage. Besides, aren't you already in the peak of the early stage? The only thing you're missing is a realm breakthrough. That's what you say, but who knows? Luo Fengxue wasn't in the mood, so she changed the topic. In fact, we all secretly said that junior martial sister Jiang would definitely suffer in the future. With martial uncle Lingshu supporting her, she's naturally a favored one, but when it comes to aptitude she's actually about the same as us. She and junior martial brother Bai Xingyang are indeed taking advantage of her when she performs dual cultivation. Martial uncle Xingyang did this to appease Drifting Cloud's peak. Mo Chenga said, if martial uncle Lingshu passes away, what will happen to Drifting Cloud's peak? Martial uncle Lingshu advanced to the nascent soul realm nearly 1,000 years ago, and Drifting Cloud's peak is full of his disciples and grand disciples. Luo Fengxue curled her lips. That's why Drifting Cloud's peak urgently needs another nascent soul cultivator. Otherwise, senior martial brother Danning wouldn't be so anxious to form his nascent soul instead of traveling. Alas, in my opinion, it'll be difficult for senior martial brother Danning to form his nascent soul now. Although Luo Fengxue was a foundation-building cultivator, she was the chief steward of Sweet Dew Peak, so she knew a lot more than ordinary foundation-building cultivators. Upon hearing this, Mo Chenga couldn't help but ask, did you hear this from martial uncle Xianin? Luo Fengxue said, Master did say that, but martial uncle Shoujing? She hesitated for a while before continuing, I'm afraid it's also difficult. Then why do you want them to enter closed-door meditation to form their nascent souls now? Mo Chenga was puzzled. Forming a nascent soul isn't like forming a gold core, it's very dangerous. If they fail to overcome their inner demons, it's also possible that they'll die. Luo Fengxue shook her head. Who doesn't face danger when forming their nascent soul? Even my master struggled through it. If he fails, it's also fate. She paused for a moment, then said with a smile, in fact, I think martial uncle Shoujing will succeed. With martial uncle Shoujing's temperament, he must do everything perfectly before continuing to the next step. Mo Chenga didn't say anything. Luo Fengxue didn't know, but she knew her master wasn't optimistic at all. Right, I should call him senior martial brother Shoujing now. I'm not used to it, but in any case I'll have to call him martial uncle soon. Luo Fengxue patted her head and said, I changed the subject again. What did I say just now? I was talking about junior martial sister Jiang, Mo Chenga reminded her. Oh, I'll make a bet with you. In the end, junior martial sister Jiang will still marry junior martial brother Bai. Do you believe me? Mo Chenga smiled. If I make a bet with you, wouldn't I be looking to lose? In the whole Shenqing school, who's more well-informed than you? Of course. Luo Fengxue was proud of herself. She didn't forget to lower her voice. Last time, because junior martial brother Bai refused, junior martial sister Jiang wreaked havoc in Morning Sun Peak. In my opinion, junior martial sister Jiang most likely still has a good impression of junior martial brother Bai. Because of this, junior martial brother Bai's refusal made her feel embarrassed. Unruly junior martial sister Jiang and arrogant junior martial brother Bai. This combination made Mo Chenga laugh. If that's really the case, we'll have a good show to watch every day. Who said it wasn't? Luo Fengxue chuckled. Besides, junior martial brother Bai actually doesn't have any moral integrity. Although he refused, what if martial uncle Xingyang insisted that he and junior martial sister Jiang perform dual cultivation? Junior martial sister Jiang can be considered beautiful, so he'll definitely give in. At this point, Luo Fengxue curled her lips. In my opinion, martial uncle Xingyang is the one who benefits the most. Now that he let junior martial brother Bai and junior martial sister Jiang form a dual cultivation relationship, everyone thinks he's kind, but this matter definitely won't only benefit Peak of Drifting Clouds. Senior martial brother Danning's chances of successfully forming his nascent soul aren't high, and there aren't many other Peak of Drifting Clouds disciples who have a chance, but junior martial brother Bai's chances of forming his nascent soul in the future are very high. When junior martial brother Bai forms his nascent soul, he can enter Peak of Drifting Clouds. How great would that be? Mo Chenga was silent for a while, then said, but with junior martial brother Bai's current cultivation level, he'll need at least 200 or 300 years to form his nascent soul, right? During this time, our Shenqing school might have more than one nascent soul cultivator. At that time, wouldn't Peak of Drifting Clouds be divided? Luo Fengxue was stunned. You're right. Even if that's the case, martial uncle Xingyang won't lose anything. Let's not talk about forming your nascent soul, let's talk about forming your gold core. In the past few years, many fellow disciples have reached the late stage of the foundation building realm. I reckon the medicinal plants gathering in the magic formation this time will be very competitive. Chenga, you have to be careful. En? Mo Chenga was puzzled. Why do I have to be careful? Luo Fengxue said, although there are a lot of spiritual plants left behind from the distant past era inside the magic formation, all of them have to be handed over. When the time comes for you people to form your gold cores, the school will still have to distribute the existing medicinal pills. There are only so many medicinal pills in total, so if you people divide them among yourselves, think about it, if you take a little less, others can take a little more. Is there anyone who doesn't want you to gather a lot of spiritual plants? This reasoning was indeed correct. Mo Chenga asked, will someone attack me? They won't go that far. The school rules forbid fellow disciples from killing each other. Luo Fengshue's gaze swept over the crowd. But it's very possible that they'll trip you up and stop you outside. She never expected that the school task she didn't take seriously would actually have risks. Fortunately, her master already told her that protecting herself was more important. Come, there are some people you have to be careful of. I'll point them out to you. Chapter 236. The people Luo Fengxue pointed out to Mo Chenga were all in the late stage of the foundation building realm or were about to reach the peak stage of the foundation building realm in order to advance to the core formation realm. Among them there were both elite disciples and ordinary disciples. These people all plan to advance to the core formation realm in the near future, and their temperaments aren't very good, so you have to be extra careful. In addition, as long as they're in the late stage of the foundation building realm, you have to be careful. Although Luo Fengshue's cultivation level wasn't outstanding, she was very experienced in handling things. Mo Chenga noted her words down. I understand. Luo Fengxue smiled again. In fact, you don't have to be too careful. In any case, this is a formation to test disciples. Even if something happens, you'll just be transported out. Besides, with Grandmaster's personality, even if you don't get anything, he definitely won't treat you badly when you advance to the core formation realm. Mo Chenga also smiled. You really know Grandmaster well. How could I not? Luo Fengxue giggled. As long as I understand Grandmaster's personality, it's too easy to get things from him. Mo Chenga couldn't help but want to laugh. Others said Lord Daoist Jinghe was rude, bloodthirsty and temperamental, but his disciples and grand disciples understood his preferences and could do whatever they wanted. While the two of them were talking, a nascent soul cultivator and several core formation cultivators walked in from the outside. They were Lord Daoist Jinyang, the head Grand Supreme Elder, the school head and various managing elders. After Lord Daoist Jinyang arrived, he sat on the seat of honor and closed his eyes in silence. The school head, who stood next to him, stepped forward. School head Shen Yijin was Lord Daoist Jinyang's disciple. Although he was known as the school head of Shenqing School, Lord Daoist Jinyang was in charge of the big things and the managing elders of the various peaks had already taken care of the small things. As the school head, Shen Yijin only spoke for Lord Daoist Jinyang when they encountered small things. But in any case, he was the school head of Shenqing School, and his status was much higher than foundation building disciples like them. Once he stepped forward, the disciples who were whispering to each other all quieted down. Shen Yijin swept his gaze across the hall and said, Dear disciples, I believe that the masters of the various peaks have already roughly explained to you the reason for summoning everyone back to the mountain. Today I will tell you in detail once more. Not long ago, we discovered a spirit array at the foot of the main peak. This spirit array is extremely complicated. It is a huge spirit array formed by hundreds and thousands of small spirit arrays. According to the Grand Supreme Elder's research, this formation was not dangerous. It should have been used by the ancient cultivation sects to test their disciples. Now that hundreds of thousands of years have passed, this array still retains some of its functions, and a small part of the rewards for the disciples is still intact. Also, the most important thing is that the spiritual qi environment of hundreds of thousands of years ago is still preserved in the array. After hundreds of thousands of years of reproduction, the originally unremarkable spiritual herbs have become a huge wealth in the present day. At this point, Shen Yijin looked at the reactions of the disciples. Sure enough, although some rumors had already spread, it was the first time many ordinary disciples knew the specific situation. At this moment, they were whispering to each other, discussing spiritedly. Shen Yijin raised his hand to stop everyone's whispers. Everyone should be able to understand that this is a huge opportunity for our Shenqing school to develop. If the spiritual herbs growing in this formation are refined into medicinal pills, I don't know how many high-level cultivators our school will produce. According to the research of several grand elders, This spell formation is most powerful if Foundation Establishment disciples enter. Therefore, we're calling all Foundation Establishment disciples back. You'll have equal opportunities. The sect will reward you with medicinal pills according to the amount of spiritual plants you collect from the spell formation. Medicinal pills as a reward. Although they had long heard about it, the Foundation building disciples' faces were filled with joy now that they received the sect head's affirmation. From the aura refining realm to the Foundation building realm, the value of medicinal pills definitely wasn't as simple as advancing one realm. 4 aura refining disciples. Aura nourishing pills cost no more than 2 spirit stones each. For those who came from rich families, it wasn't a big deal for them to keep taking aura nourishing pills. However, once they reached the Foundation building realm, even for elite disciples, the amount of soul nourishing pills they received was no more than 20 pills a year. Therefore, for these Foundation building disciples, other things were fine, but medicinal pills really couldn't be missed. Good. Now that everyone understands the cause and effect, I'll now talk about the characteristics of this magic formation. Seeing the enthusiastic atmosphere below, Shinijin smiled and nodded. After the Grand Supreme Elders examined this magic formation, they discovered it's the 10,000 laws of nature formation recorded in ancient records. Everyone, don't underestimate it. Any formation that's called a magic formation is a combination of several kinds of formations. This formation is the same. The specific power of this formation isn't recorded in ancient records. However, the Grand Supreme Elders have already investigated it. This formation is purely used to test disciples. There's no danger to their lives. This formation is roughly divided into 3 parts. The first part is the 5 spirits killing body. In this part, all disciples need to pass one stage at a time and solve it through combat. Everyone can do as you please and see how many stages you can pass with your own ability. Remember, passing stages isn't the goal. Every time you reach a stage, you just need to collect the spiritual herbs that exist in that stage. The second part is the 5 hindrances overturning senses. In this part, everyone must be especially careful. Guard your mind and be careful of the 5 hindrances of greed, anger, delusion, slowness, and doubt. If you're entangled by the 5 hindrances, not only will you be immediately sent out of the formation, but your mind will also suffer damage in a short period of time. You mustn't lower your guard on this point. The last part is the 5 confusions plaguing spirit. The 5 confusions are bewitching heart, bewitching wisdom, bewitching thought, bewitching spirit, and bewitching intent. It's complicated to explain, but in fact you only need to remember one point. No matter what appears in front of you, you must distinguish between what's real and what's fake and hold fast to your Tao heart. After saying that, Shinijin looked at Lord Taoist Jinyang. Seeing that he didn't seem to have any objections, he continued, the so-called 10,000 laws of nature formation. Everyone must remember the 4 words 10,000 laws of nature, and you'll definitely be able to walk to the end. Alright, I'll give you some time to think about what to do. Right after he finished speaking, a disciple asked, Martial Uncle Sect Head, may I ask how many disciples are allowed to enter this formation together? Sect Head Shin answered, this formation has endless changes. Once you enter, you can't control it, so you have to be alone. Upon hearing this, the discussions in the hall became even louder. Outsiders couldn't be trusted, but there were still some good friends in the cultivation group. When they went out to gain experience, they would feel a lot more at ease with their good friends by their side. If they were alone, they would have to face a lot more dangers. Mo Chenga and Luo Fengxue already knew about this, so they didn't think much of it. Another disciple stood up. Martial Uncle Sect Head, will we meet in the formation? Sect Head Shin stroked his beard and smiled. Of course. There are more than 300 of you. Although the formation is big, it's impossible to separate all of you. If you happen to meet each other, I hope you can help each other and tide over the difficulties together. Mo Chenga and Luo Fengxue glanced at each other. Both of them had helpless expressions in their eyes. Although they were from the same cultivation group, there were also people they didn't like. Right now they were all competitors. There might be people who helped each other, but there might also be people who hurt each other. They still had to rely on themselves for everything. After a long time, the scene gradually calmed down. Seeing that everyone had accepted it, Sect Head Shin said, since everyone's ready, let's enter the formation. Nearly 300 foundation building disciples came out of the hall in a single file, then boarded their flying magic tools. They then followed the sect head and several elders and flew down the main peak in a grandiose manner. At that moment, Mo Chenga saw Yi Jinji excitedly discussing with Hualing in the crowd. She flew over and called out, Jinji? My auntie. Although the two of them were already cultivators in the same realm, one was in the early stage of the foundation building realm while the other was in the late stage. Mo Chenga asked in a low voice, "Did your master prepare the things for you?" Yi Xinji nodded. "And master gave me a lot of talismans and unique treasures. He also taught me what to do." "That's good." After thinking for a moment, she took out several bottles of medicinal pills from her robe. "Take these. Don't be reluctant to use them. Use them when you need them." And, knowing that his aunt didn't lack medicinal pills, Yi Xinji also accepted them. Mo Chenga was still worried, so she warned him repeatedly, "It's fine as long as you try your best. There's no need to force things. Protect yourself first. By all means don't get hurt." "I know." In fact, Yi Xinji was very excited about this magic formation test. Before he built his foundation he only went back to the secular world once. After he built his foundation he only went down the mountain to do some small errands with his fellow martial brothers and sisters. He still hadn't gone out to gain experience. Mo Chenga smiled at Hualing then flew back to her own group. Upon seeing this, Luo Fengxue moved closer to her and said with a smile, "You really dote on your nephew. He's martial uncle Shoujing's only disciple. What could he possibly lack? Don't worry blindly." When this matter was brought up, Mo Chenga felt a bit depressed. She shook her head but didn't say anything. Soon the group of people flew to the bottom of the valley and stood in line. When everyone was gathered, the sect head and several elders stepped forward. Each of them made a hand seal. A burst of white light rose from each person's body. The white light became brighter and brighter until it eventually merged into one and rushed towards the rock wall. The white light disappeared as soon as it touched the rock wall. In the blink of an eye, a dark hole appeared on the rock wall. Then they began to lay an extremely complicated formation in front of the hole and embedded pieces of high-grade spirit stones. Upon seeing these high-grade spirit stones, all the foundation building disciples' eyes lit up. These were high-grade spirit stones. Foundation building disciples like them rarely saw middle-grade spirit stones, but the number of high-grade spirit stones they took out all at once was at least several hundred. When they finished laying the spirit stones, several elders struck their palms together. The formation flashed and several hundred high-grade spirit stones flashed, starting to continuously supply spiritual aura to the formation. School head Shin turned around and said loudly, "Disciples, as you can see, the operation of this magic formation consumes too many spirit stones. After it's open this time, it'll be at least 30 to 50 years before it can be opened again. I hope all disciples can grasp this opportunity well." School head Shin then signaled the elders to step aside. "Alright, now we'll start. Go in one by one from left to right." The first line was the disciples of nascent soul cultivators like them. There weren't many people. Shanqing School now had a total of 6 nascent soul cultivators. Among them, 5 advanced several hundred years ago. Among the disciples they accepted, there were only a few foundation building disciples. Lord Daoist Shenin was the only one who advanced not too long ago, so all his disciples were in the foundation building realm. Nevertheless, there were only about 20 disciples in total. After Luo Fengxue, who was in front of her, went in, Mo Chenga also walked towards the 10,000 laws of nature formation. After crossing the formation supporting the operation of the magic formation and entering the cave on the rock wall, Mo Chenga's vision suddenly darkened and brightened. She looked around and found herself standing on an extremely vast water surface. Chapter 237. The surface of the water was very calm and sparkling. The gentle breeze made Mo Chenga think of the sea she saw when she first arrived in Linhai. But she knew that was just an illusion. When it was angry, the waves would surge and swallow countless people in an instant. Luo Fengxue explained the so-called 5 spirit killing formation to her. There were 5 kinds of spiritual auras, each with a formation. Only by passing all 5 formations, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, could she be considered to have passed the test. The 5 spirit killing formation had a very small chance of mutation. It could choose 2 to 5 kinds of spiritual auras and combine them into a new kind of formation. Her luck was very good. The formation in front of her didn't have any mutation and was just an ordinary water spiritual formation. But how could she break the formation? Metal gave birth to water, water gave birth to wood, earth restrained water, and water restrained fire. Therefore she couldn't use the elements of metal and fire. It was better to use the 2 elements of wood and earth or magic weapons. Mo Chenga pondered for a while. Her magic weapons didn't have any clear 5 elements, so she might as well use talismans. Once she made up her mind, she took out an earth magic talisman and flew high. Looking down from above, the surface of the water was boundless, but there weren't any waves, so she couldn't see any danger. But the calmer it was, the more unusual it was. How could a formation specially used to test people's ability in fights of magical powers be calm? Emo Chenga made a hand seal and threw several talismans down. As soon as these talismans touched the surface of the water, they made deafening rumbling sounds. Wind and waves finally rose. The surface of the water that was calm a moment ago immediately turned into monstrous waves that almost swept her down. The surging spiritual aura tried to cut her apart. Emo Chenga stopped in midair and steadied her mind. This formation was only the first test to enter the 10,000 laws of nature formation, so it couldn't be considered powerful. Under her continuous attacks of earth talismans and spells, the wind and waves soon lost their strength and gradually subsided. The water under her feet began to blur. Emo Chenga smiled. She had some confidence in formations. This 10,000 laws of nature formation was too big for her to understand, but what was so scary about a small 5-spirit killing formation? Just as she thought of this, a new formation was formed, and the smile on her face froze. After a while, she showed a bitter smile and sighed. Sure enough, she couldn't be too full of herself. In front of her was a raging gale, flashes of lightning, rolling sand and stones, and raging fire. She had obviously hit the jackpot, the metal, wood, fire, and earth 4 elements mutated formation. This time, she didn't have time to think about how to break the formation. Violent winds swept over, lightning struck down, and the spiritual light formed by the 4 kinds of spiritual auras all attacked her. She took out the white silk handkerchief, but it didn't turn into a brick wall. Instead, it slowly expanded and wrapped around her like a gauze. This was the method she had comprehended during her 10 years in the Tao Achieving Pagoda. Although it wasn't any better than the original brick wall, it was more flexible. Then she searched her Chenkuan pouch and tossed out 2 items. They were 2 stone sculpture puppets. After Emo Chenga obtained these 2 puppets, she went through a round of sacrificial refining and could already use them as she pleased. They were perfect for breaking through this 10,000 laws of nature formation. As soon as the 2 stone puppets landed on the ground, they brandished their giant swords and rushed towards the sand and rocks. They were extremely strong. In an instant, the sword chi that they brandished tore the sand and stones apart. Even the raging fire had to make way for them. But this still wasn't enough. Lightning came from metal, wind came from wood, earth gave birth to metal, and wood restrained earth. These 2 stone sculpture puppets were of the wood attribute, so they were helpless against the lightning and the violent winds. Emo Chenga thought for a moment, then opened her spiritual beast pouch and released Xiaohua. Xiaohua was now a spiritual beast in the peak of the 3rd rank. It was no longer a 1st-rank spiritual beast that could only be used to provide her with concocting fire when she first caught it. With the power of its sun real fire, it already possessed the ability to fight as a spiritual beast. It was precisely because of this that Emo Chenga deliberately put it into the spiritual beast pouch and carried it with her instead of leaving it in the virtual sky world like before. Now it finally came in handy. Xiaohua had already established a subordination contract with her. 1 person and 1 beast were connected, so Emo Chenga didn't need to say anything. Xiaohua already jumped down, opened its mouth, and spewed out sun real fire to fight against the violent winds and lightning. Emo Chenga hovered in the air, using her divine comprehension to command the stone sculpture puppets and Xiaohua. After advancing to the late stage of the foundation building realm, with her current strength, she no longer feared anyone below the core formation realm. Even if this was a formation left behind from the Middle Ages era, with her familiarity with formations, there was nothing to be afraid of. Before long, under the attacks of the stone sculpture puppets and Xiaohua, the lightning became more and more powerless, the raging fire gradually extinguished, the violent winds stopped, and the sand and stones also quieted down. Emo Chenga was about to heave a sigh of relief when she saw the 4 kinds of spiritual aura slowly converging on the ground. Then, the sand and stones slowly surged as if they were half alive and gradually condensed into a stone man. Upon seeing this, Emo Chenga's expression turned solemn. This stone man had a body made of sand and stones, eyes made of raging fire, and arms made of wind and thunder. It was obviously formed by the fusion of the 4 spirits. Formations from the Middle Ages era were indeed not simple. She waved her hand and Xiaohua, who was staring at the stone man, ran back into her arms. Emo Chenga patted its head. "Don't act rashly. Attack when I tell you to." Xiaohua whimpered twice and obediently shrank beside her legs. Emo Chenga sent out her divine comprehension. The 2 stone sculpture puppets each brandished their stone swords and attacked the stone man. The flames in the stone man's eyes flickered, and it turned its head towards the puppets. Mo Chenga had seen the strength of these two stone sculpture puppets before. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say they had infinite strength. At this moment, the stone swords ruthlessly slashed at the stone man, but the stone man didn't dodge and faced it head-on. Boom! With a loud, muffled sound, the stone sculpture puppets retreated several steps. They were actually beaten back by the stone man. Mo Chenga's expression was grave. Fortunately, these stone sculpture puppets were made of special materials. Although their strength wasn't a match for the stone man, they weren't damaged. Mo Chenga thought for a moment, then patted Xiaohua. "Xiaohua, attack it. Stay far away from it and don't let it touch you." Xiaohua grunted in response and leaped up from the side of her leg. Fire magic was cast on the stone man's body. The stone man's movements were slow. When it saw Xiaohua's spells, it didn't dodge or evade. Instead, it turned its body and faced Xiaohua's sun real fire with its body of sand and stone. Stone came from earth and fire gave birth to earth. Mo Chenga didn't expect that the stone man formed by the four spirits actually had elementary intelligence. Mo Chenga raised her brows. She had never seen such a formation before. This stone man was formed by the fusion of the four spirits. The principle of mutual promotion and restraint between the five spirits couldn't destroy it. It was also incomparably sturdy and had infinite strength. Furthermore, it didn't have any divine sense. Mo Chenga couldn't use any of her attacking methods. Because she was in midair, the stone man couldn't fly, so it could only brandish its wind and thunder aura to attack her. Mo Chenga used the white silk handkerchief to protect herself while dodging left and right, racking her brains. Her spells couldn't work, her weapons couldn't work, and her soul-refining art couldn't work. What other methods did she have? Right trap. Break the formation with a formation. Having made up her mind, Mo Chenga put her hands into her Qingquan bag, then raised her hands, throwing out several formation flags. These formation flags were full of formation vein patterns using special beast blood. After they were placed around the stone man, Mo Chenga took out the largest formation flag and condensed her aura on her finger. Her finger moved as fast as lightning and pointed at the formation flag. All the formation flags arranged around the stone man immediately stood up. Mo Chenga waved the formation flag in her hand. All the formation flags around the stone man shone brightly and suddenly interweaved into a net of light, enveloping the stone man. The flames in the stone man's eyes throbbed, and the wind and thunder aura in its arms moved faintly. Countless wind and thunder spells were continuously used, but it couldn't sense Mo Chenga's breath. It had no consciousness, no emotions, only simple intelligence. When these formation flags were arranged around it, it didn't know how to retreat from the range of the formation and could only stand there in a daze. Now that the formation had been arranged, it couldn't find Mo Chenga's position at all. It could only use the simple intelligence given to it by the person who arranged this formation to use wind and thunder attacks to try to break the cage that trapped it. If it was an ordinary formation, it would have probably been forcibly broken under its wind and thunder attacks. However, the formation Mo Chenga laid was an improved formation she studied from the Xuanji formation book and combined with the related books in the virtual sky world. The stone man's wind and thunder attacks hit the formation. The formation flags swayed, but they didn't fall. Mo Chenga kept pouring spiritual aura into the formation flags, firmly trapping it. This was a stupid method. Hundreds of high-grade spirit stones were needed to open this huge formation, so it could be imagined how much spiritual aura was needed. There were a total of 300 people who entered, and each of them had to undergo the test alone. Therefore, the test they had to undergo must have a spiritual aura limit. Otherwise, other people's tests would be affected. As long as they persisted for a while and exhausted their spiritual aura, the test would be over. Mo Chenga was also helpless. She was now in the late stage of the foundation building realm and wasn't afraid of cultivators below the core formation realm, but this was, after all, a formation from the Middle Ages era. She was also unlucky enough to encounter a 4 spirits into one mutated formation. The reason she could come up with this stupid method to break the formation was because she was proficient in formations. Time passed bit by bit. The sound of wind and thunder on the stone man's body finally subsided and it collapsed with a loud bang. The formation flags on the ground, which had been enduring the stone man's fierce attacks, also softened. Mo Chenga heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she took the right step. Unfortunately, this stone man was really powerful, so this Xuanji disorienting formation could be considered destroyed. She picked up the destroyed disorienting formation flags on the ground and put them into her Qingquan bag. The scenery around her slowly changed. The wild scene just now gradually disappeared, revealing its original appearance. It was just a cave. The frightening thing was that after such a series of attacks, there wasn't even a trace left on the surrounding rock walls. Emochenga was lost in thought. This formation was really powerful. It was really unexpected. The several kinds of talismans she used in the formation, the two stone sculpture puppets' tremendous strength, and Xiaohua's sun real fire unexpectedly didn't leave a trace on the rock walls. It was clear that this formation could completely eliminate the power inside the formation. Xiaohua's whimpering came into her ears. Emochenga followed its line of sight and saw it drooling while looking at a spiritual plant in the corner. She smiled and picked Xiaohua up. Don't look. No matter how much you look, it won't be yours. If you want spiritual panaceas, wait until we're done and enter the virtual sky world. You can eat whatever you want then, but this won't do. Xiaohua let out a dejected, but didn't struggle anymore. Emochenga put it aside, then took out the medicine pouch specially used to store spiritual panaceas. She picked the mature spiritual plants growing on the rock walls and in the corners, then put them into the pouch. As for those that looked like seedlings or weren't mature enough, she just let them continue to grow. After she finished doing all this, she put the medicine pouch into her Chengkuan bag and walked towards the depths of the cave with Xiaohua. Chapter 238. 10,000 rays of sword light scattered, and the momentum of 1,000 directions remnant light was like a rainbow, killing countless ice-condensing beasts. In the end, these ice-condensing beasts turned into water vapor and dissipated in the air. Yi Jingwen raised his arm and drew the sword in his hand. Seeing the vast ice field under his feet gradually turning hazy and turning into a rock wall, he smiled. Although he didn't have any treasures as a sword cultivator, he had never slacked on refining his natal sword. He practiced diligently every day, so he had always been confident in fighting techniques. This ancient formation was rather difficult, and because of this, successfully breaking it gave him a sense of accomplishment. His 20 years of hard work finally didn't go to waste. After breaking the formation, he waved his arm, and the sword in his hand flew back into the scabbard on his back. Then he took out the medicine pouch distributed by the sect and carefully picked the spirit herbs growing around him. After a while, he scanned the surroundings with his divine sense. He turned around and saw that it was a cultivator from the same sect who was also in the late stage of foundation establishment. Yi Jingwen didn't pay much attention to him. Those who could break the formation in such a short time were the elites of the elites, so they usually had a tacit understanding in this situation. If they knew each other, they would work together. If they didn't, they would pretend they didn't see each other. But soon Yi Jingwen frowned because the cultivator in the late stage of foundation establishment that he didn't know started to pick the spirit herbs around him. In this cave, although there were no obvious partitions, there were slightly spacious stone rooms, connected by a slightly narrower stone path. When this person broke the formation, he was in another stone room, but now he went through the path and picked to the stone room where he was. Yi Jingwen noticed this person's method of picking herbs. He didn't care if the roots were hurt. He dug up the spirit herbs and stuffed them into the medicine pouch, so his picking speed was much faster than Yi Jingwen's. Moreover, while picking, he kept looking at the spirit herbs on Yi Jingwen's side. This was clearly a good plan from the beginning. Seeing that Yi Jingwen's picking speed was slower, he rushed to pick some back. Senior Martial Brother. Yi Jingwen couldn't help but speak. The cultivator was busy and only looked up at him hurriedly. This attitude was simply treating him like a new foundation establishment cultivator. Yi Jingwen was infuriated. He coldly said, "Have you crossed the line?" Although the cultivator was busy, he said, "What's the hurry, Junior Martial Brother? These elixirs don't belong to you alone. When we entered the array, the sect leader said that after we pass the test, we have to pick all the elixirs we see. Of course, whoever picks them belongs to them." These words sounded reasonable, but it was a little unreasonable. 4 cultivators of the same sect like them, wouldn't it be very easy for disputes to arise if they really wanted to snatch it quickly? Therefore, there were some established conventions that everyone would abide by under normal circumstances. Not only did this person not abide by the rules, but he was also twisting words and forcing logic. Although Yi Jingwen wasn't a domineering person as a sword cultivator, how could he allow others to bully him? He said coldly, "I've already picked the spiritual herbs here. Senior brother, please leave the stone room." The cultivator finally stopped pretending to not see him. He dusted his hands and stood up. He looked at Yi Jingwen and said, "Junior Martial Brother, you look so young. Why do you care about this little bit of spirit medicine? It's not that Senior Martial Brother wants to compete with you, but with my age, my core formation is imminent. I can't let go of this opportunity. How about you let me have a go? If this person used this reason to explain it to him in the beginning, Yi Jingwen might have allowed it. He was a sword cultivator, so his reliance on medicinal pills was lower than that of mainstream Dharma cultivators. However, this person took advantage of him first and only said it after everything was over. Moreover, he called himself senior marshal brother and didn't sound like he was begging him. Mo Chenga repeated coldly, "Senior marshal brother, please leave the stone room." Seeing that Mo Chenga's attitude was so unyielding, the cultivator looked angry. He looked at Yi Jingwen and said, "I'm Dong Shiyang, a disciple of Master Taoist Wuyang of Morning Sun Peak and a grand disciple of Grandmaster Jinyang. May I ask Junior Marshal Brother's title?" He was using his identity to oppress others. Yi Jingwen said coldly, "I'm Yi Jingwen, a disciple of Master Taoist Qingyuan of Clear Spring Peak." Upon hearing what Mo Chenga said, the cultivator's eyes flashed. "So Junior Marshal Brother is Grandmaster Jingha's grand disciple. Don't blame me for being like this." He looked Mo Chenga up and down, but his meaning was self-evident. Yi Jingwen became even more annoyed. Lord Taoist Jingha's temper wasn't good, so his reputation wasn't very good. However, he never bullied his disciples. This person was also a disciple of Shenqing school, but he had this kind of attitude. How could Yi Jingwen not be angry? He immediately said angrily, "Senior Marshal Brother, please conduct yourself with dignity. Don't humiliate the Grandmaster of Clear Spring Peak." "How did I humiliate him?" Dong Shiyang laughed mockingly. "Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you're making something out of nothing. I didn't do anything." Yi Jingwen's expression was as dark as still water. Without saying a word, his sword was already unsheathed and hovering next to him. The cultivator's expression also darkened when he saw Mo Chenga unsheathing his sword. "Junior Marshal Brother, could it be that you want to attack a fellow disciple?" Yi Jingwen also laughed mockingly. "Senior Marshal Brother Dong, you're also making something out of nothing. I just unsheathed my sword, yet you're accusing me of attacking you?" The cultivator's face also turned pale from anger. The two of them were ready to fight, and the atmosphere was on the verge of exploding. All of a sudden, a slight explosion came from the side. Another person had broken through the formation. Dong Shiyang turned around and was delighted. "Marshal Uncle Bai." Yi Jingwen's expression darkened. This person was Lord Taoist Jinyang's disciple, Bai Yanfei. Bai Yanfei's expression was very unsightly. His cultivation level was still in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Although it was quite good for his age, he wholeheartedly wanted to compare himself with talented youths like Qin Shoujing and Li Lingxi who advanced to the core formation realm before the age of 100. Shenqing school had always been famous for producing talented cultivators. In their generation, Qin Shoujing advanced to the core formation realm at 78 years old, and Li Lingxi advanced to the core formation realm at 96 years old. Both of them were worthy of being called geniuses. As a disciple with a single spiritual root, Bai Yanfei had always disdained to compare himself with other cultivators. However, he was now 57 years old, yet he was only in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. He was almost certain that he couldn't catch up with Qin Shoujing. Even catching up with Li Lingxi would be a bit difficult. Given Bai Yanfei's arrogant personality, this was really unbearable for him. Unfortunately, after entering this 10,000 laws of nature formation, he spent a lot of effort to break the formation in the first trial, the 5 spirits killing body, and he even put himself in a very difficult situation, so he was very annoyed. Now that he heard someone calling him, he glared at them and said, "What's your name?" His tone was quite unpleasant. Dong Shiyang greeted him enthusiastically, but he was stunned by Bai Yanfei's retort. However, he realized there were other people here, so he immediately pretended he didn't care and still showed a smile. "Marshal Uncle Bai, you also came out?" Bai Yanfei also realized his tone just now was too bad, so he just gave a perfunctory "in" and glanced at the two people, then continued to look for a way to go. How could Dong Shiyang let him leave like this? He immediately said, "Marshal Uncle Bai, aren't you going to pick medicinal plants?" Bai Yanfei actually didn't care much about the reward this time. His master was Shenqing School's head Grand Supreme Elder, and he himself had excellent qualifications, so he never lacked medicinal pills. Nevertheless, picking medicinal plants was his main task this time, so when he heard Bai Yanfei's words, he just casually picked 2 plants. Yi Jingwen's complexion turned even greener. Bai Yanfei didn't pick the medicinal plants from the stone room he came out from. Instead, he just happened to walk to his side and squatted down to pick them. Seeing Dong Shuyang casting him a complacent glance, Yi Jingwen's expression darkened and he called out, "Martial Uncle Bai." Bai Yanfei didn't care at all. He just let out a lazy "n," because he thought Yi Jingwen was greeting him just like Dong Shuyang. But then he heard Yi Jingwen say, "Martial Uncle Bai, as an elder shouldn't you abide by the rules?" Although he tried his best to restrain his anger, his words still carried some anger. Bai Yanfei stopped, stood up and turned around. He stared at Yi Jingwen with a frown. "What do you mean?" Yi Jingwen said, "If you want to pick medicinal plants, you should pick the medicinal plants from the stone room you came out from. This is the place I'm picking. It's fine if you don't restrain the disciples of Morning Sun Peak, but how can you break the rules?" For a moment, Bai Yanfei didn't seem to understand what Yi Jingwen was talking about. He turned to look at Dong Shuyang, but he saw Dong Shuyang looking at him with fear and trepidation. His attitude was completely different from Yi Jingwen's. With this contrast, Bai Yanfei's dissatisfaction towards Yi Jingwen also emerged. "What's wrong with you? Since you're calling me Martial Uncle Bai, how can you talk like that?" Yi Jingwen was currently in a fit of anger. Seeing that Bai Yanfei not only didn't correct his behavior but also reprimanded him with the tone of an elder, Yi Jingwen sneered. "That depends on how Martial Uncle Bai acts as a martial uncle. You took the lead in breaking the rules, yet you still want to put on the airs of an elder? When had Bai Yanfei ever been reprimanded like that?" Thinking back and forth, aside from his master, only a certain woman from Clear Spring Peak had ever reprimanded him like that. However, that was a memory he didn't want to bring up. "You're so unreasonable. Of course these spiritual plants belong to whoever picks them. Why can't I pick them here?" Dong Shuyang chimed in from the side, "That's right. I also don't understand what this junior martial brother Yi is thinking. Presumably this is the rule of their Clear Spring Peak, but we're not from Clear Spring Peak, so why should we follow it?" Clear Spring Peak. These three words ignited Bai Yanfei's anger. He sneered. "So you're from Clear Spring Peak, humph? Like I said." Yi Jingwen was usually very proud of Clear Spring Peak, so how could he tolerate others insulting Clear Spring Peak? He immediately shouted, "Martial Uncle Bai, since you're a martial uncle, please show some self-respect." Bai Yanfei angrily said, "How can I not have self-respect? Disciple, do you not respect your elders? It was obviously you who spoke rudely to your elders, yet you still dare to say that I don't have self-respect?" Yi Jingwen fiercely glared at him. "Martial Uncle Bai, as an elder, you didn't abide by the rules first, didn't restrict your disciples, and even showed disdain towards my Clear Spring Peak. How can you have self-respect? As a disciple of Clear Spring Peak, we naturally have to respect our elders when we meet them, but if we can't even have self-respect, how can we be worthy of other people's respect?" Bai Yanfei's expression changed because his words were too harsh. When he saw Yi Jingwen's flying sword hovering around him, he also sneered. "Good, you want to fight, right? That being the case, why are you still looking for excuses?" Right after he said that, he unreasonably touched his waist and took out the crescent-shaped machete. The machete flashed as he injected his spiritual aura into it. Seeing that this martial uncle was not only unreasonable but also wanted to fight a junior, Yi Jingwen also became angry. He no longer cared about the school's rule that fellow disciples weren't allowed to kill each other. He raised his arm and pointed, causing the flying sword hovering around him to shine brightly. Upon seeing this, Dong Shuyang also took out his own magic tool. The situation could be triggered at any moment. Bang! A loud explosion was heard. Another disciple broke through the formation and was happily picking spiritual plants when he saw the three people facing each other not too far from him. He was shocked. "Senior Martial Brother Yi." It was Luo Fengxue. Chapter 239. Luo Fengxue being able to break out of the formation relied on a bit of luck. Although she was only one step away from the middle stage of the foundation building realm, she was, after all, in the early stage of the foundation building realm. The fierceness of the five spirits formation was far beyond her imagination, so she was practically flustered. Originally he thought that he would have to exit the first round, but he discovered that his luck was pretty good. He just happened to have a restraining talisman on him, so he passed the round and smoothly broke out of the array. Luo Fengxue was bewildered by the scene before her. Why did Senior Martial Brother Yi and Bai Yanfei have a conflict? She called Yi Jingwen Senior Martial Brother, because the two of them used to be Lord Daoist Jinghe's grand disciples and both of them were good friends with Mo Qianga, so she didn't change the way she addressed him now. She then looked at the two people opposite Yi Jingwen and politely called out, "Junior Martial Brother Bai." As for the person next to her, she actually recognized him. He was one of the people she told Mo Chenga to be careful of. However, she was now a nascent soul cultivator's disciple, so she didn't need to take the initiative to greet him. When Bai Yanfei saw Luo Fengxue, he didn't recognize her, so he could only vaguely call her senior martial sister. Dong Shiyang, however, recognized her, so he helplessly saluted her. Martial Uncle Luo. As Luo Fengxue watched the scene before her, she whispered to Yi Jingwen, "Senior martial brother Yi, what's going on?" Yi Jingwen said helplessly, "They clearly came out from another stone room, yet they want to harvest the spiritual herbs here." Oh. Luo Fengxue's eyes moved in a circle. When she saw the empty stone room next to her that didn't even have a single spiritual plant, she roughly understood what happened. However, her temperament wasn't as impulsive as Yi Jingwen's. She was still all smiles as she said, "Junior martial brother Bai, it's just a small matter. Let's each take a step back." Bai Yanfei was only acting on impulse. Now that Luo Fengxue had given him a way out of this embarrassing situation, he agreed. Oh, since senior martial sister said so. Dong Shiyang on the other hand was a bit anxious. The reason he pulled Bai Yanfei along was because he wanted to pick more spiritual plants. If Bai Yanfei agreed, wouldn't that mean he wouldn't be able to take advantage of him? He said, "Then junior martial brother, you should apologize to our martial uncle Bai, and this matter will be settled." It would have been better if he hadn't said this. Once he did, anger appeared on Yi Jingwen's face again. "What did you say?" Dong Shiyang noticed that although Luo Fengxue's seniority was high, her cultivation level was low, so he already had a plan in mind. He ignored Yi Jingwen's angry expression and said, "You were disrespectful to martial uncle Bai, so you should apologize." Yi Jingwen fell into the trap. He said coldly, "Martial uncle Bai should be the one apologizing. Seeing that the juniors of Morning Sun Peak didn't follow the rules and even took the lead to cause trouble, I didn't ask martial uncle Bai to apologize, but you want me to? Or could it be that our Shenqing school is unreasonable and only looks at seniority?" When Bai Yanfei heard what Mo Chenga said, he originally felt a bit guilty, but his anger flared up again. "Junior, you're so unreasonable. Who told you to speak to me in such a tone? Don't tell me our Shenqing school has no seniority?" "Junior brother Bai, senior brother Yi," Luo Fengxue hastily interrupted. She secretly glared at Dong Shiyang, but on the surface she said with a smile, "We're in the middle of a test. If you have something to say, you can talk about it outside." With Luo Fengxue smoothing things over, the two of them finally calmed down a bit. Just as they were about to find a way out of this embarrassing situation, someone else came. "Isn't this senior brother Bai? You think you're talented and have a transcendent status, so why are you quarreling with a junior? If word of this gets out, you'll really lose martial uncle Xinjiang's face." A mocking female voice rang out. Everyone looked up. Luo Fengxue cried out inwardly. Why was this junior martial sister Jiang also coincidentally here? If these two people bumped into each other, wouldn't they be torn to pieces by heavenly lightning and earthly fire? Although Bai Yanfei was furious, he wasn't an unreasonable person. He was originally in the wrong, but he couldn't back down because of his pride. Now that he heard this junior martial sister Jiang's voice, he lost his reason again. He cast her a cold glance and said, "What does it have to do with junior martial sister Jiang whether I lose master's face or not? As long as I don't lose your drifting cloud peak's face, that'll be enough. Or could it be that you're eager for me to lose drifting cloud peak's face?" There was a hidden meaning in his words. If the two of them didn't have any relationship, it naturally had nothing to do with drifting cloud peak. However, if it would lose drifting cloud peak's face, it naturally meant the two of them had a relationship. Furthermore, he also added the words eager. He was obviously implying that this junior martial sister Jiang was eager to have a relationship with him. Even ordinary women would be annoyed if they heard this, let alone this junior martial sister Jiang, who was known for being unruly. Without saying a word, she took out a ribbon and was obviously about to attack. Luo Fengxue didn't know what to say. If Yi Jingwen and Bai Yanfei had a conflict, she could still mediate, but if this junior martial sister Jiang and Bai Yanfei had a conflict, regardless of her identity, it would be best if she didn't intervene. Otherwise, she'd bring trouble upon herself. Therefore, as soon as she saw this scene, she pulled Yi Jingwen and quietly stepped back. This junior martial sister Jiang didn't disappoint. She waved her ribbon and attacked Bai Yanfei. Her cultivation level was only in the early stage of the foundation building realm, but this ribbon was a magic weapon and was indeed formidable. Bai Yanfei didn't dare to underestimate it. He brandished his crescent-shaped machete, and the knife lights shone against each other, tearing open the spiritual aura barrier around the ribbon. The two of them fought back and forth, and the spiritual aura in the stone room intertwined. Upon seeing this, Dong Shuyang didn't know whether he should be happy or sad. If there were people in the stone room who hadn't broken the formation, there would be an illusory formation in the stone room, and they wouldn't be able to see the spiritual plants. That was why he wanted to freeload some from Yi Jingwen. However, now that there were people breaking the formation one after another, freeloading would be difficult, so he might as well try his luck elsewhere. Unfortunately, Martial Uncle Bai was fighting with someone, so it wasn't good for him to leave. While Dong Shuyang was anxiously pacing around, Luo Fengxue, who found him unpleasing to the eye, gave Yi Jingwen a meaningful glance and shouted, "Surname Dong, you dare to attack me?" Yi Jingwen, who had already noticed her meaningful glance, immediately answered, "Dong Shuyang. It's fine if you hit me, but why did you have to plot against Junior Martial Sister Luo? Junior Martial Sister Luo is only in the early stage of the foundation building realm." As he spoke, he pointed his flying sword at Dong Shuyang. Dong Shuyang's expression changed. He shouted, "You!" Before he could say anything, Yi Jingwen's flying sword had already arrived in front of him. This was the scene Mo Chenga saw while she was picking spiritual plants all the way here. She was a bit dumbfounded. What's going on? Bai Yanfei and that junior martial sister Jiang were fighting, Big Brother Yi was fighting with a late-stage foundation building cultivator, and Luo Fengxue had a secretly complacent expression on her face. "Tiange!" Luo Fengxue saw her first and shouted, "Come quickly. Someone's bullying me." Upon hearing Luo Fengshue's shout, Mo Chenga had no choice but to walk over. "What's wrong?" Mo Chenga's face was filled with suspicion. Did Luo Fengshue's expression look like she was being bullied? Besides, although this cultivator was in the late stage of the foundation building realm, his skills and fights of magical powers were very ordinary. With Yi Jingwen here, how could he bully her? Luo Fengxue winked at Mo Chenga with a smile on her face, but she said with a bit of panic, "That person plotted against me just now. Fortunately, senior martial brother Yi was here." Mo Chenga caught Luo Fengshue's gaze and looked at that person. He was one of the people Luo Fengxue previously warned her to pay attention to, so Mo Chenga immediately understood. She said, "Rest assured. Since he dared to bully you, we'll give him a bit of suffering." This Dong Shuyang was very slippery. Seeing that Mo Chenga was also a late-stage foundation building cultivator, he immediately shouted, "Junior martial brother Yi, martial uncle Luo, you've misunderstood." "I didn't. Yi Jingwen naturally wouldn't hold back. Taking advantage of the opportunity while Dong Shuyang was talking, his flying sword pierced through Dong Shuyang's defense and pierced his right arm. Dong Shuyang screamed in pain. Yi Jingwen withdrew his flying sword and said coldly, "This is a little lesson for you. It's better to behave yourself." Dong Shuyang, who was lying on the ground, saw that Bai Yanfei was fighting with someone and had no time to pay attention to him. Yi Jingwen, Luo Fengxue, and Mo Chenga were also watching him coldly from the side. How could he dare to say anything? He also didn't care if his face would look bad, so he just crawled up and ran away. Once that person left, Yi Jingwen's flying sword returned to its sheath. He walked back and greeted Mo Chenga. "Chenga, what a coincidence. You're also here." Mo Chenga smiled. "Unfortunately, I won't be able to watch this show." She then asked in a low voice, "What were you guys doing?" Luo Fengxue also told her what happened just now in a low voice. After listening to what happened, Mo Chenga couldn't help but laugh. "Turns out you're also not honest." Luo Fengxue covered her mouth. "I see this kind of thing a lot between disciples, so I borrow it from time to time. This person's heart isn't right, so it's not a big deal even if I wrongly accuse him." Using evil to control evil, Mo Chenga didn't express her opinion. Her gaze was fixed on Bai Yanfei and junior martial sister Jiang, who were fighting. Unexpectedly, she was able to see some tricks in their fight. Bai Yanfei's cultivation level was higher than this junior martial sister Jiang's, so he wasn't in danger. However, because of the school rules, he didn't seem to dare to hurt junior martial sister Jiang. As for this junior martial sister Jiang, she was also a bit strange. She was obviously being lenient. Luo Fengxue noticed her gaze, so she moved closer to her ear and whispered, "You also noticed, right? That's why I said they'll definitely succeed." In fact, Bai Yanfei wasn't bad. Aside from his somewhat childish character, he was also good-looking, had high aptitude, and his cultivation level was just around the corner. He also had Lord Daoist Jinyang as his backer. Junior martial sister Jiang had good taste. If she didn't pick Bai Yanfei with her personality and vision, she probably wouldn't pick anyone else. The three of them stood on the side and watched for a while. Just as they were about to leave, they heard Junior Marshal Sister Jiang shouting from behind them, "You're not allowed to leave." Mo Chenga and the other two stopped, looked at each other, then turned around. Luo Fengxue said, "Junior Marshal Sister Jiang, what's the matter?" Junior Marshal Sister Jiang's gaze swept over them and finally landed on Mo Chenga. She raised her head and asked, "Are you that Senior Marshal Sister Mo?" "Am I?" Mo Chenga noticed her tone and answered, "Yes, I am." "Junior Marshal Sister Jiang, is there something you need?" Her tone was kind and didn't intend to make enemies. This Junior Marshal Sister Jiang looked her up and down, then turned around to glare at Bai Yanfei. "Is this the Senior Marshal Sister Mo you originally pursued? What do I lack from her?" Bai Yanfei felt ashamed when he saw Mo Chenga, so he pretended he didn't see her. Now that Junior Marshal Sister Jiang questioned him like this, he felt a bit embarrassed and shouted, "What does it have to do with you?" Junior Marshal Sister Jiang raised her eyebrows and waved her ribbon, causing her spiritual aura to fluctuate. "Bai Yanfei, I don't understand. What do you dislike about me, Jiang Min? Whether it's cultivation level, aptitude, or age, what's bad about me? Yet you keep thinking about Senior Marshal Sister Mo. You dislike me, but aren't you being disliked by Senior Marshal Sister Mo? Who's better than the other?" Her tone carried a bit of disdain, successfully making Bai Yanfei's face turn red. He glared at Jiang Min fiercely. "I don't want to perform dual cultivation with you, so why are you pestering me? Do you really want to marry me that much?" Junior Marshal Sister Jiang, however, wasn't angered by him. Her gaze was still full of disdain. "I just find it strange. Do you think you lost face after being rejected by Senior Marshal Sister Mo, so you want to get back at me? Bai Yanfei, are you very satisfied with this?" "You?" Bai Yanfei's face turned from red to purple. Junior Marshal Sister Jiang still didn't let him go. "Do you feel very comforted after rejecting me? You looked down on me because I was rejected by Senior Marshal Sister Mo. Now you see, Junior Marshal Sister Jiang was also rejected by me." She imitated Bai Yanfei's tone when she said the latter part of her sentence. It was indeed quite similar, causing Mo Chenga and the other two to burst out laughing. Although this Junior Marshal Sister Jiang was unruly in some aspects, she was actually quite cute. "You're wrong. Luo Fengxue shouldn't be calling him Senior Marshal Brother Bai, she should be calling him Junior Marshal Brother Bai." Chapter 240. Seeing the three of them laughing, Bai Yanfei lost his composure. He angrily said, "Jiang Min, you're a woman, yet you don't care about your face." Junior Marshal Sister Jiang continued to sneer. "When did you ever give me face? Bai Yanfei, I've never been humiliated like this in my life. You made me lose face, yet you're blaming me for being shameless." Very few people would talk to Bai Yanfei so rudely, but the ones who spoke to him coldly were all women, especially when the last person who spoke to him like this was right next to him. He awkwardly glanced at the three people who were watching from the side, then fiercely glared at Jiang Min. "Whatever you say, in short, this is how it is." After saying that, he turned his head and ignored them, angrily leaving. Junior Marshal Sister Jiang laughed and followed him. "Bai Yanfei, you admit defeat?" Bai Yanfei said angrily, "Why would I admit defeat?" Junior Marshal Sister Jiang gave him a sidelong glance. "You're too pretentious. No matter what you're thinking, you have to pretend to look down on everyone. Is that good for you?" "Jiang Min." Bai Yanfei shouted again. This Junior Marshal Sister Jiang spoke too rudely and didn't leave him any face. "What's wrong? Do you feel uncomfortable?" Junior Marshal Sister Jiang didn't let him go and followed him reluctantly. "If you admit defeat and take back what you said, I won't pester you anymore." "Why?" Bai Yanfei said angrily, "You're unruly and hateful. You said I look down on people, but your nose is still up in the sky. I only snort a few times with my nose up in the sky, unlike you. If a bird flies above me, some unknown object might fall into your nose. You're a girl. Don't you think it's rude to say that? You're the one who said I'm unruly. So what if I'm rude?" The two of them bickered as they walked further and further away. The three of them stood there for a while before regaining their senses. Luo Fengxue sighed and shook her head. Morning Sun Peak will be lively in the future. Mo Chenga pursed her lips and smiled. "Aren't you very happy?" Luo Fengxue smiled. "When I'm free I just watch a show." Yi Jingwen, however, shook his head. "Don't celebrate too early. In my opinion they might not succeed." Upon hearing what he said, Luo Fengxue tilted her head. "What?" Yi Jingwen said, Although this martial uncle Bai isn't much in other aspects, he is very persistent. Have you ever seen him go back on his word? Both Mo Qianga and Luo Fengxue muttered to themselves. In the end they shook their heads. Yi Jingwen smiled. This martial uncle Bai values his face very much. His refusal to accept martial uncle Zhang's offer is already set in stone. Our entire sect is well aware of it. If he were to go back on his word, wouldn't he be slapping his own face? Besides, martial uncle Jiang was pestering him to the point that he couldn't stand it anymore. If he admitted defeat, he would lose face. That's why I said that it's hard to say who will have the last laugh. After pausing for a moment he continued, actually, among us male disciples, we are hoping that martial uncle Jiang won't marry this martial uncle Bai. Luo Fengxue was curious. What do you male disciples say about junior martial sister Jiang? And what about this junior Bai? Although she had always been in charge of disciples' affairs, there were still differences between men and women. Some gossip couldn't reach female disciples' ears, so she took this opportunity to ask. Yi Jingwen said, "Oh? We all say that martial uncle Bai relies on the fact that he's Grandmaster Xinjiang's disciple and has his eyes on the top of his head, making people not want to get close to him. As for martial uncle Jiang, some people think she's unruly and willful, so it's best to keep a respectful distance from her. However, some people think she's beautiful and has a straightforward temperament. Although she's willful, she's also cute." Luo Fengxue sighed. Sure enough, there are differences between men and women. Regarding Bai Yanfei, some female disciples also said he was dissolute and unrestrained. Although he was arrogant, he was more charming. As for Jiang Min, her reputation was a bit worse. People said she relied on Grandmaster Lingshu to look down on others. Whether it was men or women, they were always more tolerant toward the opposite sex. Yi Jingwen smiled. He didn't need to ask to know what Luo Fengxue meant. He looked around then asked, "Junior martial sister Luo, you haven't picked any medicinal plants yet, right?" Luo Fengxue hastily turned around to look. Fortunately, no one had broken out of the formation in the vicinity recently, so her spiritual plants were still there. I almost forgot. Yi Jingwen also hadn't finished picking his medicinal plants. Mo Qianga looked at him then said, "Fengxue, let me help you." She came here after picking the medicinal plants, so she'd already finished her own business. Luo Fengxue didn't refuse. With their friendship, she wasn't afraid of pocketing anything. She immediately waved her hand. "Okay, come quickly." Yi Jingwen was halfway through picking, but Luo Fengxue hadn't started yet. The two of them worked together, so they were a bit faster than Yi Jingwen. Before long they finally finished picking everything. Now that they were done with their business, the three of them talked about what they encountered in the formation. Sure enough, the formations they encountered were very normal, separated 5 spiritual formations. Mo Qianga was the only one who encountered a mutated formation. Yi Jingwen and Luo Fengxue were extremely shocked to learn that Mo Qianga encountered a mutated 4 spiritual formation. They were even more speechless about how she was able to escape smoothly. After a long time, Luo Fengxue finally patted her shoulder and said, "Qianga, you should form your gold core soon." Mo Qianga was puzzled. "Why?" Luo Fengxue said earnestly, "If you don't form your gold core, us foundation-building cultivators won't be able to survive." Although her words were exaggerated, she was actually praising her. Mo Qianga couldn't help but laugh. "I'm just relying on the treasures I have." If she didn't have Xiaohua and the 2 stone sculpture puppets, it really wouldn't have been that easy for her to break the formation. "We've broken the first test, but what about the second test?" Luo Fengxue had a well-thought-out plan for this. "We'll just walk around casually. When the time comes, it'll naturally activate." Yi Jingwen asked, "The 3 of us are in the same place. Will we enter the formation together or will we be separated?" "We might be together, but we might also be separated." Luo Fengxue shook her head and said, "It'd be good if we were separated. The second test, 5 hindrances overturning senses, will produce illusions. If we're together and affect each other, it'll be even more troublesome. Cultivators' divine comprehensions could also affect each other. Especially when they were very close, if one of them felt uneasy, the others would also be affected." Yi Jingwen was surprised. "Why didn't the sect head tell us before we came?" Luo Fengxue said, "It'll only affect us a little. Moreover, generally speaking, it won't be life-threatening." She then carefully warned them, "However, you still have to be careful. After the 5 hindrances overturning senses test, there's the third test, 5 confusions entangling spirit. At that time, illusions visible to the naked eye will appear. The previous test directly attacks our divine comprehensions. Generally speaking, we just need to meditate and stay firm to our hearts, then we'll be able to pass. The second test will produce real illusions, but it'll be hard to distinguish between real and fake. If we're unlucky and the second test comes before we even pass the previous test, we might fall into a demonic barrier. Upon hearing this, Mo Qianga recalled that during the demonic beast riot many years ago, she and Wei Jiasi once entered a bewildering formation laid by bewitching moonstones. What they saw with their own eyes was like what they saw with their own eyes. Presumably, the last test, 5 confusions entangling spirit, was like that. As for the 5 hindrances overturning senses, it was more like an inner demon during a realm breakthrough. There were countless thoughts that directly attacked one's divine comprehension. If one's willpower wasn't strong enough, one would be confused by these thoughts and hallucinate, even getting lost inside. Of course, this was only a magic formation for training, so there shouldn't be any life-threatening dangers. However, if one really got hit, injuries would be unavoidable. If things weren't good, it might even leave an irrecoverable mental injury. Lord Taoist Jinghe briefly mentioned these things to her before they set off, and sect head Shen also reminded the disciples to always remember the 4 words, all laws of nature. However, even though they said that, they didn't know how many people would actually be able to do it. Yi Jingwen pondered. In that case, aren't we going to experience the inner demon during core formation ahead of time? You're right, Luo Fengxue said. Of course, this 5 hindrances overturning senses formation is still a bit weaker than the inner demon during core formation. Since the distant past era, cultivators' abilities have declined a lot, but the power of inner demons has always been the same. Therefore, for cultivators like us, inner demons are especially terrifying. What she said made Yi Jingwen frown. Why didn't the school elders explain this in detail before we entered the formation? Luo Fengxue smiled and said, Senior Martial Brother Yi, don't worry. For people like us who usually don't relax and cultivate, it's not difficult to pass this test. Oh. Yi Jingwen muttered to himself, what about the last test? When this was mentioned, Luo Fengxue's expression turned solemn. I reckon only a few people can pass the last test. That illusion was too real. In our school, even nascent soul martial uncles found it very difficult to pass the first test. As for senior martial brothers and sisters in the core formation realm, there were a few who persisted until the 3rd test, but in the end, none of them could pass completely. Is that difficult? It wasn't just Yi Jingwen, even Mo Qianga was staring at her. Then is it safe for us to pass this test? Luo Fengxue smiled and said, Qianga, did you forget this is a magic formation for training? There won't be any life-threatening danger. Unless we kill each other, this magic formation won't harm our lives. It was limited by the school's rules. Presumably, it was possible for fellow disciples to trip each other up, but it shouldn't be to the extent of killing each other. Luo Fengxue continued to say, our martial uncle Suxin has entered this formation before. She said that in the 2nd test, you can still distinguish between reality and illusion by guarding your mind. However, in the last test, it's basically as if it's real. Moreover, your reason will gradually leave you just like a dream. You'll also treat some absurd things as real. Isn't this even more powerful than the bewitching moonstone? Mo Qianga couldn't help but wonder if her spirit-concealing pendant had any effect on this. Yi Jingwen asked first, are things like heart-cleansing talismans and the like useful? They are, Luo Fengxue said with certainty, but it's hard to say how effective they are. Mo Qianga nodded, indicating that she understood. That's to say, we'd better not get too close or too far away from each other. It wouldn't be good if they got too close and affected each other's divine comprehension, but if they got too far away they wouldn't be able to take care of each other. And Luo Fengxue agreed. The 3 of us just happened to run into each other, it'd be too inexcusable if we didn't take care of each other. For the sake of safety, let's split up later. We'll keep a certain distance from each other. Don't lose each other, but don't get too close either. Mo Qianga and Yi Jingwen didn't have any objections. Although their cultivation levels were higher than Luo Fengxue's in fights of magical powers, Luo Fengxue's ability to handle matters was far inferior to theirs. Furthermore, she had a lot of insider information, so she should know better than them what to do. Alright, we might enter the 2nd test at any time, so let's split up now. Chapter 241. The 3 of them separated from each other about 100 feet away and followed her unhurriedly, neither too far nor too slow. In fact, to Mo Qianga, who spread out her divine sense, this distance was equivalent to nothing. However, it was better than nothing. If she restrained her divine sense, the influence of her divine comprehension would be reduced. Emo Chenga even looked forward to the second test. If nothing unexpected happened, after this matter was over, she would enter closed-door meditation until she reached the peak stage of the foundation building realm and then try to advance to the core formation realm. For cultivators like them who had never experienced the core formation realm before, the most frightening test was the inner demon. If the 5 hindrances overturning senses in the second test were like inner demons, then she would have to experience a similar test before advancing to the core formation realm. At that time she would have some experience and would know how to deal with it. After the three of them walked for a while, Yi Jingwen asked quietly, "Why isn't there any movement?" He used his divine sense to transmit his voice, so their surroundings were still quiet. Emo Chenga also felt something was wrong. She frowned and thought for a while, then asked, "Why is there no one else but us?" Yi Jingwen was shocked. "That's right. Our speed in breaking the formation is considered fast, but after such a long time, shouldn't there be more people breaking the formation?" Luo Fengshua pondered. In the foundation building realm, the number of people who can pass the first test shouldn't be few, but it also shouldn't be too many. However, there really shouldn't be no one else but us. Luo Fengshua frowned for a long time, then suddenly shouted, "Maybe we're already in the second test, the 5 hindrances overturning senses, so we can't sense the situation around us." Emo Chenga looked around and saw that they were already in the belly of the mountain. The surrounding rock walls were still the same as before, but the terrain was no longer the same as before. There was more soil, and there were many spiritual plants growing densely in the surroundings. She didn't know where the sunlight came from, but it illuminated everything. Yi Jingwen unsheathed his flying sword and guarded his body. "Junior Martial Sister Luo, are you sure? Is there any danger around us?" Luo Fengshua carefully examined the situation around them, then closed her eyes to ponder. In the end she nodded cautiously. "It should be. Try to spread your divine sense. How far can you spread it?" Emo Chenga and Yi Jingwen closed their eyes and spread their divine senses. Not long after, the two of them wore grave expressions. There was indeed a problem. Their divine senses could only extend several hundred feet before they could sense 3 people. Luo Fengshua said, "It's starting. Let's guard our minds and stop affecting each other." Even though the 3 of them were together, the other 2 would be affected if one of them made a mistake, so it was better for them to go their separate ways. Since Luo Fengshua said that, neither Emo Chenga nor Yi Jingwen had any objections. They each looked for a place and prepared to experience the 5 hindrances overturning senses test. Emo Chenga laid a simple defensive formation around them, then sat down cross-legged to guard against any mishaps. Closing his eyes, he cut off all the surrounding sensations and shut off his spiritual sense, focusing only on his own knowledge. The spiritual energy circulated naturally and calmed his mind. Very quickly she felt that she had entered a magical realm. Everything around her was far away, and it was as if she was in an empty field. The wind was rustling, the wind was gentle, and she was the only person in the world. Emo Chenga also didn't expect that this time, she would actually enter the divine forgetting selfless state so coincidentally. The state of mind was a very mysterious topic. Generally speaking, this kind of state of mind was very difficult to communicate with others. When teachers taught their disciples, they could only guide them slowly, but everyone's feelings were different, so in the end they still had to rely on themselves. The only way to cultivate one's state of mind was to see, hear, and see. Only by gaining some comprehension could one make progress. There was no other way. Emo Chenga didn't think she'd experienced much in the more than 20 years she'd been traveling outside. Most of the time she was trapped in Bishuan Court's Tao Achieving Pagoda. In fact, the pressure Ren Yufeng felt inside the Tao Achieving Pagoda was also a kind of state of mind cultivation. Moreover, when she studied the notes Mo Yaoqing left behind in the pagoda, she saw Mo Yaoqing's life experiences, so this was also a state of mind cultivation. When she arrived in the secular world, she went to Yi Clan to check on second uncle's situation. Then she happened to enter Ziwei's Immortal's cave and learned about Wanderer Ziwei's life as well as the ill-fated relationship between Yao Zixio and Shang Ruan. Then she went to the northernmost glaciers and encountered Ren Yufeng's incident. Finally she arrived at the Eastern Sea. In these more than 20 years, Mo Chenga's state of mind had unknowingly reached a certain realm, so she easily entered the divine forgetfulness and anatta state in this 5 hindrances overturning senses test, which was similar to an inner demon. Mo Chenga didn't know how much time had passed, but in her hazy state she seemed to have returned to the Mo family's village in Jin country. "Husband, do you really want to leave?" Although she was dressed like a married woman, The woman's face still retained the childishness of a young girl. She looked at the man in front of her reluctantly. This man was about 30 years old. Compared to his wife, he was indeed a bit older, but he was refined and had a calm demeanor. He had a mature charm that a young man in his early 20s didn't have. He looked at his young wife and comforted her. "Don't worry, I'll be back in a few days." But the woman wanted to say something but stopped. She lowered her head and said nothing. The man smiled gently. He took his wife's hand and placed it on her flat belly. "I'll try my best to rush back before the child is born. During this period of time, if you have any problems, just tell sister-in-law Wang. I've asked her to take care of you." The woman was a bit shy. "Husband, you already know?" "How could I not know?" He stared at his wife's belly, which still couldn't be seen. There was an imperceptible gloomy look in his eyes. "I hope this child can be safe and sound." Several years later, "Mother, why don't I have a father?" The little girl with bruises on her face asked her sickly and pale mother. Her mother, who was gently applying medicine on her, stopped when she heard this question. "Mother?" The woman regained her composure and shook her head. "Don't listen to their nonsense. Your father went out to do something. He'll come back when he's done." "But..." The little girl was confused. "Did father go to a very, very far place? He still hasn't come back?" "And very, very far." Therefore she made a wish that day, hoping her father would come back soon. That way no one would say she was a child without a father anymore. Then, Tienga Tienga, your father is back. That day was her birthday. Her mother cooked longevity noodles and fried a poached egg for her. She heard Auntie Wang's voice from next door. A man walked in from outside the courtyard. He looked travel-worn, but he had a smile on his face. Her father was exactly the same as her mother said. They were kind, gentle, and their smiles made her feel warm. "Tienga, you're Tienga." Her father lowered his body. "You've grown so big. I'm your father." Her mother came out of the room with tears in her eyes. Her father smiled, picked her up, and walked to her mother. "Wife, I'm back. I'll take you away." Asterisk, 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 her wish came true. Everything was vague, as if she was dreaming. However, she saw her father's appearance and her heart was full of joy. This feeling of joy was real. Her father took her mother and daughter back to Kunwu to teach her cultivation. From the aura refining realm to the foundation building realm, her life was so smooth. She grew up, advanced to the core formation realm, and Yi family didn't decline. Later she met a man. They liked each other and became dual cultivation partners. Later she advanced to the nascent soul realm and traveled unhindered in the celestial pole, unrivaled by anyone. She had more and more things. No matter what she wanted, she would eventually get it. Kinship, friendship, love, family, cultivation level, spiritual treasures. Finally, she entered the deification realm and became a godlike existence in the world. She stood at the top of the world, looking down at the world below her. Everything was in her hands, but she felt empty, as if she hadn't obtained anything. She suddenly began to doubt whether everything was real or not. If it wasn't real, why did it feel so real? If it was real, why was everything in front of her always so blurry? She liked this feeling of completeness too much. There wouldn't be any deep regrets in the depths of her heart that couldn't be buried no matter how hard she tried. But why did she feel empty, as if she hadn't obtained anything? Suddenly she felt a chill in her chest, waking her up from her beautiful dream. Mo Tienga opened her eyes, feeling a lingering fear. She had entered a state of selflessness and guarded her heart, but she still fell into the trap. She really didn't know what would have happened to someone with an unstable state of mind. She looked around and found 5 or 6 people sitting around her. Yi Jingwen and Luo Fengxue were also among them. Sure enough, Luo Fengxue's guess was right. In fact, they entered the second test not long after they walked out, but she was still at a loss, so she couldn't see the surrounding scene. This test made Mo Tienga realize that although she wasn't trapped in anger, obsession, slow-wittedness, and doubt, her greed was deeply buried in her heart. She wanted to return to her childhood, find her father, and have a complete family. She also wanted to enter the cultivation world smoothly instead of wandering around for more than 10 years. She wanted to have relatives, friends, and lovers. She wanted everything to be complete. She also wanted to succeed in her cultivation, advance to the deification realm, and laugh proudly in the world. As it turned out, she was actually this greedy. As it turned out, she never forgot these childhood regrets. Ever since she came to Shenqing School, her cultivation path had been very smooth, and she always thought she didn't have any other desires aside from the path of cultivation. As it turned out, she still had her greed suppressed in her subconscious. Thinking up to this point, cold sweat broke out on Mo Chenga's forehead. If she hadn't entered this 10,000 laws of nature formation this time, she wouldn't have realized there were flaws in her state of mind. If she tried to advance to the core formation realm like this, there would definitely be some twists and turns. Fortunately, she happened to enter this 10,000 laws of nature formation before she advanced to the core formation realm, so she realized the weakness of her state of mind. In the following time, she definitely had to solve this greed before she could advance to the core formation realm. After making up her mind, Mo Chenga closed her eyes again and continued to adjust her breath for a while. It was only after she regained her composure that she stood up and began to pick the spiritual plants around her. What to do next was a bit difficult for her. Yi Jingwen and Luo Fengxue were still here. From time to time, expressions of pain or happiness appeared on their faces. Obviously, they were still undergoing the test of the 5 hindrances overturning senses. They originally agreed to take care of each other, but her current situation was a bit special. It wasn't like what Luo Fengxue said. After the second test, she wouldn't directly enter the third test. If she stayed here, she didn't know what kind of illusion she'd have. What if she thought everyone around her was her enemy? After a while, no one around her was clear-headed. Everyone was still going through their own mental test. Mo Chenga thought for a while, then stood up and continued to walk inside. She had her doubts about whether she should stay or not, so she might as well do as she pleased. Besides, there were a lot of spiritual plants here, so it would be good if she could pick some more. As she walked and picked spiritual plants, she gradually walked further and further away. She gradually forgot where she was. Chapter 242. The phoenix flowers that filled the sky dyed the small path between the rock walls a deep red. No one could have expected that there would be such a secret path inside the mountain. The path changed from light red to pink to dark red, and was surrounded by red envelopes of different shades. Mo Chenga took a closer look. This was a kind of phoenix tree with fallen leaves. Based on how lush it was, it probably grew from the Middle Ages until now. The branches of the fallen phoenix tree could be used to refine tools, and the flowers and fruits could be used to refine pills. It was truly a treasure. She opened the medicine pouch and slowly picked up the ripe fruit that had fallen to the ground. This was the most precious part of the fallen phoenix wood. Then he picked the flowers and 1 or 2 branches that didn't affect the main trunk and put them into his Chengkuan bag. Once she was done, Mo Chenga went back the way she came. However, she found that she could not remember the way she came. There were many forks in the rock walls of this mountain. For cultivators, this wasn't something difficult to distinguish. However, when Mo Chenga stood at the fork, she found that she really forgot where she came from. This feeling of loss was something she had never felt before. In the beginning, she suspected that she had not passed the second stage at all, which was why she had this feeling of not remembering the way at all. However, what he saw in front of him was too real. The fragrance of the soil, the brilliance of the phoenix wood, whether it was what he saw, heard, or touched, it was so real that he couldn't tell it was fake. Could this be the third stage? She pondered. The 5 confusions haunting spirit, everything she saw was an illusion, but it was no different from reality. Thinking of this, he made a prompt decision and found a place to sit under the phoenix tree. When you don't understand the situation, it's best to deal with it by remaining unchanged. Furthermore, the 5 confusions plaguing spirit was just an illusion. If he didn't see anything, he probably wouldn't be affected. She stuck a heart-calming talisman on her body and swallowed a soul-calming pill. After thinking for a moment, she took off the spirit-concealing pendant and held it in her hand. She then sat down cross-legged and closed her eyes, preparing to face the third test. Although the spirit-concealing pendant could still be used by hanging it around his neck, it would be more effective if he placed it on his palm, where it would be directly attached to his meridians. That dreamlike feeling appeared again. She was in a daze, as if her rationality had left her. She felt like she was about to fall asleep. Grand Master. In the haze, Mo Chenga heard a voice. She opened her eyes and saw Ruan Mingzhu through the sparse leaves and branches of the phoenix tree. Why was she here? Also, why did he call her Grand Master? A moment ago she was still thinking like that, but the next moment she felt there was nothing wrong with Ruan Mingzhu being here. Why did she feel there was something wrong with her? Ruan Mingzhu didn't see Mo Chenga. There was a sweet and innocent smile on her face. As she walked, she kept glancing at the people around her as if she was walking together with someone else. But the seat beside her was clearly empty. Grand Master. While walking, Ruan Mingzhu pouted and said, "Senior Marshal brother ignored me, but you didn't even talk to him." After a while, she seemed to hear the people beside her say something. She pursed her lips and said reluctantly, "Why do I have to learn from senior brother? We're only in our 20s, yet we're already at the foundation building realm. Are we afraid that we won't have enough time to form our gold core? In my opinion, it's not normal for senior brother to act like an old man at such a young age." After saying that, she paused for a while before covering her mouth and laughing, looking very happy. "In any case, I want to be happy. What's the purpose of cultivating? It's not for the sake of locking myself in a cave for seclusion." At that moment, Ruan Mingzhu had already arrived in front of the phoenix tree. She raised her head to look at the red phoenix tree, but she couldn't see Emo Chenga, who was sitting not far from her. "Wow, it's so beautiful. Next time, I must bring senior martial brother here to see it." After she said that, her expression became confused for a moment before she slowly revealed a smile. "Senior martial brother, I'll take you to see something. Let's go, let's go." Then she seemed to be pulling someone and walked all the way to the phoenix tree. "Look, isn't it beautiful?" After a while she humphed and said with displeasure, "Senior martial brother, you're accompanying me to play now. Can't you focus a bit?" "Aya?" Ruan Mingzhu's current smile was completely like a little girl's. She didn't have any schemes and was simply happy. "Senior martial brother, you'll be bored to death like this. I don't believe you like cultivating all the time, it's so boring." Haha. She reached out to pull that non-existent person. "Senior martial brother, you have to smile more. You look so good when you smile." Emo Chenga opened her eyes and stared at Ruan Mingzhu, who was not far from her. Her vision blurred for a moment, and a person quietly appeared next to Ruan Mingzhu. He reached out and stroked Ruan Mingzhu's head, saying, "Don't talk nonsense. We'll go back after we've had enough fun." Ruan Mingzhu turned her head. "No, I don't want to go back. Senior martial brother, it wasn't easy for us to come out." The spirit-concealing pendant in her palm felt cold. Emo Chenga quivered and her mind became somewhat clear-headed, but she was confused by what she saw. Is this real or fake? Is it Ruan Mingzhu's illusion or mine? As soon as this thought emerged in her mind, the person in front of her slowly faded away. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed she was affected by Ruan Mingzhu. Because Ruan Mingzhu was experiencing an illusion, she also thought of a person who should exist. After a while, Ruan Mingzhu's expression changed again. Her originally charming and cute little girl appearance disappeared and was replaced by an aggressive and angry look. "Do you think I don't know what you're thinking?" She angrily pointed at the phoenix tree in front of them. "I'm telling you, don't be delusional. Take a look at yourself. You want to steal my senior martial brother? In your dreams. You're still talking back to me? That's right. Even if I'm Grandmaster's grand disciple, so what? I can call you senior martial brother, but can you? Wei Jiasi, take a clear look at your identity." This. Emo Chenga wanted to hear more clearly, but her own mind was also starting to become muddled. Ruan Mingzhu's voice was both near and far. "Fine, I'll teach you a lesson today. What can you do about it?" Anger emerged on Ruan Mingzhu's face. She regarded the phoenix tree as Wei Jiasi and raised her hand, thrusting her sword forward. A leaf was cut off from the phoenix tree. Emo Chenga wanted to stand up, but she discovered that her consciousness was hazy. What's going on? Fortunately, Ruan Mingzhu stopped. A mournful expression appeared on her face. Grandmaster, what did you say?" "No, don't drive me away," she shouted. "Grandmaster, I didn't mean it. I really didn't mean it. Don't drive me away, okay?" She begged bitterly while looking at the person who originally didn't exist. "Senior martial brother, help me tell Grandmaster that I didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to teach her a lesson, but I didn't expect I'd be so heavy-handed. What's the difference between going to the branch courtyard and driving me away? Grandmaster, for my father's sake, can you forgive me this once? I promise I won't do it again. This time it's for real." She started to cry. She squatted on the ground, tears streaming down her face. After a long time, she finally wiped the tears off her face. "You won't let me go back. Fine, I won't go back. Let's see when you'll come to pick me up." But she was disappointed. From being angry in the beginning, her expression slowly turned numb as she sat there in a daze. Then after a long time she laughed happily. "I can go back? I can really go back?" She smiled happily. "I knew Grandmaster and Senior Martial Brother loved me the most. They definitely wouldn't let me stay there alone. Grandmaster." She jumped up, but in the next second, the smile on her face froze. "Grandmaster, you still want to send me back?" She shouted. "Why? It's been 60 years, Isn't that enough? To punish me, isn't it enough to leave me in that place? I don't want to go back. Senior Marshal Brother. She seemed to have seen something and anxiously tried to grab someone. Senior Marshal Brother, I'm back. The smile on her face only lasted for a while before it turned into disbelief. Senior Marshal Brother, what did you say? Even you. She fell to the ground, muttering to herself, You really don't like me anymore? Why won't you forgive me after so long? Why do you always say it's my fault? In the past, even if I did something wrong, you'd always forgive me. But this time, do you really plan on never forgiving me? Tears slowly flowed down her haggard face and dripped on her hands. She didn't even have the strength to cry. Her eyes were filled with despair. What am I still alive for? No one likes me, even Grandmaster and Senior Marshal Brother don't like me anymore. She slowly raised her head and stared fixedly at a certain place as if she was looking for something. After a long time, hatred and sorrow flashed in her eyes. So you already have someone to replace me? What, Marshal Uncle Emo? Grandmaster, Senior Marshal Brother, look at me. I'm Mingzhu. I'm the only Mingzhu you love. Grandmaster. No, you don't like Mingzhu anymore? I don't accept it. She's obviously mine. Grandmaster is mine, and Senior Marshal Brother is also mine. A fierce expression appeared on Ruan Mingzhu's face. She slowly turned her head and approached Emo Chenga, who was sitting cross-legged under the phoenix tree. Wei Jiasi, do you want to laugh at me? Ruan Mingzhu's expression clearly showed that she regarded her as Wei Jiasi. Emo Chenga opened her eyes. She felt something was wrong, but she couldn't say what it was. Ruan Mingzhu drew her sword and slowly stood up. So what if I teach you another lesson? In any case, it's like you said, I have nothing left. Emo Chenga watched helplessly as Ruan Mingzhu raised her hand and stabbed the sword in her hand. In a flash, Emo Chenga finally moved. She raised her hand and blocked the sword with her spiritual aura, but she couldn't hold the thing in her hand and it fell. Ruan Mingzhu bent down to pick it up. It was a jade pendant. It was round and had a warm color. It was painted with cloud patterns and tied with a red string. In the middle of the other side, a small Qin character was engraved. Ruan Mingzhu's eyes widened. She was surprised at first, then puzzled, then her expression turned gloomy and anger emerged. Her fingers trembled. Senior Marshal Brother, you actually gave this jade pendant away, Her gaze gradually turned cold. She turned to look at Emo Chenga, but it was unclear whether she was talking to Emo Chenga or talking to herself. Grandmaster and Senior Marshal Brother hate me, people in the school look down on me. Why do I still want to be Ruan Mingzhu? No, I don't want to be Ruan Mingzhu anymore. Her gaze was gloomy as it fell on Emo Chenga's face. It's good to be you. Grandmaster's disciple, I can openly call him Senior Marshal Brother. I also have good aptitudes. Maybe in a few decades I'll be able to advance to the core formation realm. At that time, a dreamy smile appeared on her face. Then I'll be you. Chapter 243. Qin. She suddenly felt his eyebrows twitch. Something seemed to have happened. He opened his eyes, frowned, and thought for a while. Cultivators sometimes had ominous and auspicious premonitions. His current situation was precisely an ominous premonition. Could it be that something had happened? He couldn't think of a reason, so he called out, Jinji. Halfway through his call, he paused. Jinji wasn't here today because he went to participate in the 10,000 Laws of Nature Formations trial. Could it be related to Jinji? After thinking for a while, he still felt uncertain. He stood up, opened the door of his cave and slowly walked out. The sun was shining brightly outside and he was in a trance for a moment. Yes, he hadn't come out for many years. He couldn't even remember how many years it had been. This was the longest closed-door meditation he'd ever had. He hadn't left his cave for more than 30 years and directly advanced from the middle stage of the core formation realm to the peak stage of the core formation realm. He was only one step away from forming his nascent soul. Originally, he planned to continue his closed-door meditation until he formed his nascent soul, but now it seemed, the space between his eyebrows was throbbing. He felt he didn't have time to think. With a wave of his sleeve, a pure white cloud appeared under his feet. He stepped on the cloud and flew towards the main peak. When the 10,000 Laws of Nature formation appeared, his master also asked him to go in and take a look, but he refused with the excuse that he was in closed-door meditation. Now he didn't know where the formation was. However, as soon as he spread his divine sense, he easily found a crowded place at the foot of the main peak. Presumably it was there. Without any hesitation he stepped on the cloud and flew down. When he landed at the bottom of the valley, he already saw the hustle and bustle. Many disciples had come out after failing the test, and they were densely surrounding something. The core formation elders in charge of the scene had long sensed his spiritual aura pressure. One of them was about to see who it was, but when he pushed the disciples aside, he was startled. Junior Marshal Brother Shojing? He approached him. Senior Marshal Brother, what happened? Oh. The elder reacted and said, you came at the right time. A disciple from your Clear Spring Peak had an accident. Qin Shi frowned but didn't say anything. He followed the elder into the crowd. Junior Marshal Brother Shojing. School head Shin, who was squatting on the ground, greeted him. Before Qin Shi could say anything, he saw the disciple lying on the ground. After a while he found his voice again. What's going on? One of the elders said, there's a problem in the third test. The two disciples bumped into each other and one of them had a hallucination of a real person, but the other was unlucky. It was the 5 confusions plaguing spirit, and his mind was starting to blur, so, following the elder's gaze, Qin Shi furrowed his brows again. Mingzhu? Ruan Mingzhu was currently sitting in the corner. She was in a daze and shivering. She didn't even respond when Emo Chenga called her. Head Shin said, she was sent out when she was plagued by a demonic spell. It's best not to summon her now. Qin Shi nodded. His gaze was fixed on Emo Chenga, who was lying unconscious on the ground. Didn't you say this was a trial formation and there wouldn't be any danger? As school head Shin continued to channel spiritual aura into Emo Chenga's body, he said, her life won't be in danger. As soon as this disciple suffered a fatal attack, she was sent out. However, her mind was in a state of confusion, and her mind was momentarily damaged. That's why she became like this. I see. Upon seeing that sect head Shin had withdrawn her hand, he also crouched down, felt Emo Chenga's pulse, and inserted his spiritual aura into her pulse. There were no problems with her meridians and her dantian was also intact. Her sea of knowledge was closed. He furrowed his brows. Her sea of knowledge was closed and it could be big or small. Although there wouldn't be any danger to her life, being attacked while she was undergoing a mental test was definitely very dangerous. If the stimulation was excessive, she might not wake up for 10 or 20 years or she might never wake up. He looked up at Ruan Mingzhu wanting to say something. However, judging from her timid appearance, she didn't seem to be in a much better state, so he eventually gave up. Junior Marshal Brother Shojing, this is your junior marshal sister from the same room, right? It'd be better if you take her back first. This matter can be big or small, so it's best to let Marshal Uncle Jinghe take a look. Qin Shi nodded without hesitation. All right. He then looked at Ruan Mingzhu and said, Senior Marshal Brother School Head, I'll have to trouble you to take care of my marshal nephew. I'll send someone to pick her up later. That's what I should do. How could School Head Shin refuse? With Lord Daoist Jinghe's personality, it was already very good of him not to settle accounts with them since his beloved disciple was injured in the formation and his grand disciple was greatly stimulated. Moreover, they indeed couldn't escape responsibility for this matter. Entering this 10,000 laws of nature formation was indeed dangerous, but they were worried these disciples wouldn't be willing to take risks, so they didn't explain in detail and only emphasized to be careful. Master. Yi Zhenji, who had just come out of the formation, happened to see this scene. He followed them with a pale face and looked at Emo Chenga. What's wrong with my aunt? Qin Shi frowned and said, let's talk about it when we get back. With a flick of his sleeve, he summoned the flying cloud and flew back to Clear Spring Peak with Yi Zhenji. The flying cloud's speed reached its limit. In a flash, it had already reached the summit of Clear Spring Peak and landed in front of Shangqing Palace. Qin Shi didn't stop and walked towards Shangqing Palace with Emo Chenga in his arms. Marshal Uncle Shojing. The gatekeeping disciple was surprised to see Qin Shi's unhappy expression and Emo Chenga in his arms unconscious. Qin Shi couldn't care less about these disciples' gazes and directly rushed into Shangqing Palace. Master. Lord Daoist Jinghe's divine sense shrouded the surroundings. Just as he was wondering what happened, he turned around and was shocked. What's going on? Qin Shi put Emo Chenga down and said anxiously, Master, take a look. She was attacked when she was undergoing the mental test in the formation. I've checked. She looks fine but her sea of knowledge is closed. Upon hearing this, Lord Daoist Jinghe grabbed Emo Chenga's wrist and felt her meridians to check her injuries. With a single glance, his face darkened. Qin Shi couldn't help asking, how is it? Lord Daoist Jinghe stroked his beard and frowned. Not good. I guess she must have just discovered her mental state has a weakness and was attacked when she was undergoing the 5 confusions plaguing spirit. Then what should we do? Lord Dawish Jinghe glared at him. Can you stop interrupting me? I haven't finished talking yet. Qin was speechless from his glare and could only admit his mistake. Okay, I won't. Lord Dawish Jinghe continued to say, she closed her sea of knowledge subconsciously to protect herself, so you don't have to worry about her safety. She should be fine. But it's a bit troublesome to wake her up. After making sure his disciple was fine, Lord Dawish Jinghe stroked his beard and said something, waiting for Qin to ask. However, after Lord Dawish Jinghe said something just now, Qin stopped asking and just stared at him, making him feel very bored. Just as Lord Dawish Jinghe was a bit annoyed, Yijinji hurriedly asked, Grandmaster, what should we do? Yijinji's timely answer made Lord Dawish Jinghe very satisfied. He immediately felt that Yijinji was very pleasing to the eye, so he said with a smile, we don't need to do anything. Just take good care of her and don't let anything happen to her body. After a while, when she realizes there's no danger, she'll naturally open her sea of knowledge slowly. Oh. Yijinji and Qin breathed sighs of relief at the same time. Qin thought for a while then asked, Master, how long will she stay in this state? It'll be a few months if it's short, it'll be a few years if it's long. Then he patted Qin's shoulder and said irresponsibly, rest assured she's still young. Even if she wakes up in a few decades, she won't delay her core formation. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand, ignoring Qin's gloomy expression. That'll do. Take her back to Mingxin residence. And let Xu Qin and the others take care of her. Qin endured and endured, but in the end he couldn't help but say, Master. A few years is fine, but a few decades. Even if she's not immortal, her body will have problems if she stays in a coma like this, okay? Can't you think of a way? Yijinji originally felt relieved when he heard his aunt was fine, but now he became nervous again. Grandmaster, really? Nonsense. The one who answered was Qin. He frowned deeply and said angrily, cultivators don't need to eat, but we also need to absorb spiritual aura and rely on spiritual aura to survive. If she's in a coma for a few years or a few decades, it'll be no problem for her to live, but if she stops absorbing spiritual aura, her body will wither. Even if she wakes up, her cultivation level will regress. Is that serious? Yijinji turned to look at Lord Dawish Jinghe pitifully. Grandmaster, you can't watch my aunt turn into a shriveled old lady. She's still young. Pfft. Lord Dawish Jinghe sprayed out a mouthful of tea. Shriveled old lady? Ah, you brat, you can think of something like that. Master. Qin glared at him angrily. If you want to laugh, you can laugh slowly when you're done. Now think of a way for me. What way? Lord Dawish Jinghe spread his hands with an innocent expression. I told you she'll wake up naturally after a while. Really? Qin's expression darkened. You don't want the 9 revolutions mind-calming pills anymore? Brat, are you threatening me? Lord Dawish Jinghe screamed. So what if I'm threatening you? Qin raised his eyebrows. Don't forget your spiritual plants are in my hands. You want medicinal pills? Fine, use your brain and solve the problem first. Lord Dawish Jinghe clenched his teeth. Brat, I asked you to learn pill concocting, but in the end you're actually threatening me. Unfortunately, Qin looked indifferent and didn't even look at him. Lord Dawish Jinghe snorted angrily. Then he suddenly thought of something and turned around to glare at Qin. Didn't you say you were in a life or death closed-door meditation? Why did you come out now? Qin was stunned. He wanted to say something, so he moved his mouth but didn't say anything in the end. Lord Dawish Jinghe watched Qin's expression change from anger to embarrassment, so he slapped the table and laughed until he couldn't stand straight. Ah, brat, you're making me laugh to death. You've been in a life or death closed-door meditation for 35 years. Why did you come out without saying anything? Hey, don't say this isn't called coming out. You've even left your immortal's cave and sat outside drinking tea. If this isn't called coming out, what is? Hey, what's going on? Tell Master, how did you know something happened to Tiange? Why did you suddenly come out? Qin didn't speak. He turned his head and looked down to count ants. Lord Dawish Jinghe sneakily approached him. Tell me quickly. What happened? You've been in a life or death closed-door meditation for 35 years. Now that you suddenly came out, you have to tell Master, right? Tell me. Qin couldn't stand being pestered anymore, so he could only say, I thought something happened to Jinji. This time, even Yijinji, who was squatting next to him, also turned his head. With his master in front and his disciple next to him, Qin looked embarrassed. I felt a bad omen and thought something happened to Jinji, so Oh, you can actually feel a bad omen. Lord Daoist Jinghe nodded seriously. It wasn't easy at all. Chapter 244. Lord Daoist Jinghe's words also had a hidden meaning. Auspicious omens were not something that just anyone could sense. If a cultivator happened to meet another cultivator on the road, would he sense whether that cultivator was going to be good or bad? Of course not. First of all, the cultivator who sensed bad or bad omens had to have a certain cultivation level. Second, there had to be some connection between them. As for what this connection was, it wasn't too particular. Generally speaking, it was a relatively intimate relationship. Lord Daoist Jinghe's words were serious, but how could Qin not understand what he meant? Yijinji was right next to him, which made him feel even more embarrassed. Therefore he glared at Lord Daoist Jinghe. Master, let's talk business. Are you the master or am I the master? Lord Daoist Jinghe had a handle on Yijinji, so he was very calm and smiled. Your disciple is right in front of you, yet you still don't respect me. Be careful or your disciple will learn from you and won't treat you well. However, Yijinji was an honest person, so he immediately said, I'll always respect master. Lord Daoist Jinghe's smile turned into anger. Brat, go away. Yijinji looked aggrieved. He looked at his master and begged, Grandmaster, please save my aunt. If she really doesn't wake up for several decades, what if her body becomes bad? Lord Daoist Jinghe snorted. Don't give me that. You two, master and disciple, one threatening and the other crying and begging. Are you bullying this old man? Qin seemed to be thinking about something, but he soon calmed down. Master, the one lying here is your disciple, not mine. Well said. Lord Daoist Jinghe clapped his hands. That's right. She's my disciple and your junior martial sister at most. Why are you more anxious than me? You even threatened me with medicinal pills. Qin was still very calm. Tell me, what do you want? Lord Daoist Jinghe was proud to see him admitting defeat. He glanced at Yijinji and said, We'll talk about it later. Upon seeing Qin secretly heaving a sigh of relief, she leaned closer and whispered, Rest assured. In front of your disciple, I'll save you some face. After he finished speaking, Lord Daoist Jinghe went back to check on Mo Chenga's condition. He then said solemnly, closing one sea of knowledge. Basically, there's no way to get an immediate effect. However, Master knows of a kind of medicinal pill that's very helpful in this kind of situation. Even if it can't wake her up immediately, it can guarantee that her body won't be damaged. Where's the pill formula? Lord Daoist Jinghe reached into his Chengkuan bag and fished around, taking out a large pile of jade slips. You guys look for it. In any case, it's right here. I forgot which one it was. Qin helplessly glared at him but had no choice but to start rummaging. Fortunately, there were 3 of them. There were hundreds of jade strips in the pile, so it didn't take them long to find them. However, as soon as he saw the pill recipe, his brows furrowed. These spirit herbs, that's right. Some of the spirit herbs are already very rare. It will probably take some time. But we urgently need it here. You don't have to worry about that. Lord Daoist Jinghe smiled mischievously. Master, I have a healing technique that's useful for this kind of situation. You can use it on her once a day. At the very least, it can guarantee that there won't be any problems for several years. Qin was still frowning. Where's the cultivation technique? This time he finally didn't take out a pile of jade strips. Instead, he threw a book made of animal skin at him. Lord Daoist Jinghe said, Since you've come out of closed-door meditation, don't form your nascent soul for the time being. Rest for a few years first. You've been in closed-door meditation for 35 years and haven't been able to relax for even a moment. Forming your nascent soul is an extremely tiring thing, so this isn't a good opportunity. Rest well for a while and come again when you feel relaxed. Qin was silent, but in the end he didn't object. If he was still in closed-door meditation, he definitely would have refused. However, given the current situation, he couldn't continue his closed-door meditation. Lord Daoist Jinghe was gratified. That'll do. Take Chenga back to Mingxin residence and let Shu Qin and the others take care of her. Those girls have been taught a good lesson by her, so you can rest assured. Qin nodded and didn't say anything else. He carried Mo Chenga and walked towards Mingxin residence. Even though he hadn't returned to Mingxin residence ever since she moved into it, he was still familiar with every blade of grass and every tree here. The pond in front of the house, the medicinal field in the back. She gave the lounge to Jinji while she lived in the cultivation room. Who said he was a cultivation maniac? In fact, she was too. Xiuqin and the others were also foundation-building cultivators. They also went to the 10,000 laws of nature formation today and hadn't returned yet. She carried Mo Tiange into the lounge and placed her on the bed. All of a sudden he remembered Ruan Mingzhu, so he said, "Jinji, go tell your grandmaster that Mingzhu also encountered some problems. Find someone to bring her back." Oh. Yi Jinji answered but didn't move. After a while, she finally shifted his gaze to him. "Why don't you go?" Yi Jinji was silent for a while, then plucked up his courage to ask, "Master, what's the relationship between you and Aunt?" She was stunned. His gaze fell into the void and stopped moving. Yi Jinji said again, I always thought there wasn't any friendship between Master and Aunt, but it seems that's not the case just now." After a while, she finally moved the corner of his mouth and forced a smile. "Don't think too much. Alright, you look after your aunt. I'll go look for your grandmaster." After he finished speaking, he left Mingxin residence without looking back, as if he was escaping from something. After he left Mingxin residence, Yi Jinji said slowly, "Master, I didn't say anything." "Why did you?" After leaving Mingxin residence, she didn't immediately go back to the main hall to look for Lord Daoist Jinghe. Instead, he sat on the railing on the side and didn't move. There were some things he always deliberately ignored, but in the end he still couldn't ignore them. 35 years. He originally thought he'd become indifferent and his heart couldn't hold anything else apart from forming his nascent soul. However, it wasn't until the moment he saw her that he realized he'd never forgotten. These 35 years were actually a trap he set for himself. He thought he could become indifferent, that he could still wholeheartedly cultivate like before, but in the end he only entangled himself more and more. What were feelings? He never had a chance to understand, so he wasn't vigilant at all. In fact, he didn't even know how it started. That year when he went to Demonic Mountain, he met Yihai. He deeply felt he and this person were kindred spirits, so they went through difficulties together. Later they were trapped on Demonic Mountain for 10 whole years. The two of them met by chance and became close friends. Unfortunately, Yihai's injuries were too heavy. Seeing that he wouldn't survive, he finally died on Demonic Mountain in order to find someone for his descendant to rely on. Although he had an indifferent personality, he was never used to owing others anything. He owed Yihai half his life, so he agreed to Yihai's last wish of entrusting his daughter to him. It wasn't that he wasn't moved when he learned that the child might be a girl with a pure Yin constitution and spiritual roots, but it was only because a female cultivator with a pure Yin constitution, as long as her spiritual roots weren't too bad, she'd generally have some achievements. Besides, if she joined a cultivation group, it was very likely she'd perform dual cultivation with a sect disciple. For a cultivation group, producing one more high-level cultivator meant their strength would be stronger. But for him, this wouldn't bring him any benefits. First of all, he cultivated pure Taoist cultivation techniques. If it wasn't for Yuan Bao's trick in the virtual sky world, which gave him the pure Yang technique and transformed him infinitely close to having a pure Yang constitution, dual cultivation wouldn't bring him any benefits worth being moved by. Second, he had his own pride. Ever since he stepped on the path to immortality, he always believed he could achieve the great Tao and didn't need to rely on unorthodox methods like dual cultivation. Third, a child, an orphan entrusted to him by someone who could be considered a friend. No matter how shameless he was, he couldn't think of this aspect. After returning from Demonic Mountain, he went into closed-door meditation to heal his injuries. At the same time, he picked a trustworthy martial nephew to do things for. At that time, he wasn't really looking forward to it because a pure Yin constitution was rare, and spiritual roots were also rare. Although the girl's father had spiritual roots and her mother had a pure Yin constitution, it was most likely that she was an ordinary person. Who would have thought that the news brought back by that martial nephew would surprise him? It was really a child with a pure Yin constitution and spiritual roots. Moreover, she'd already embarked on the path of cultivation. But what was worse was that martial nephew messed things up again, causing that uncle and nephew to misunderstand their intentions. At that time, he thought that since that person was this child's uncle and respected his elder brother very much, he'd certainly treat this child well. Since they were worried he had bad intentions, he'd just let them be. In any case, he only wanted to return half of Yihai's life. He didn't covet anything from them. He also wasn't so enthusiastic that he still wanted to deliver himself to them after being rejected. Later, his injuries didn't heal, so he had no choice but to leave the sect to look for medicine. The reason why he went to Yunwu sect was because although this small cultivation group wasn't well known, it had the spiritual plants he wanted. Moreover, their patriarch also passed down a rare body refining technique in Kunwu, and he happened to be collecting body refining techniques. Therefore, he decided to sneak into this small cultivation group. In any case, it was far enough from West Kunwu. Even if other people knew who Qin Shoujing was, they certainly wouldn't know who Qin Shi was. He was naturally quiet. Aside from cultivating, he wasn't interested in anything else. After entering Yunwu sect, being together with a group of aura refining disciples was really meaningless. However, since he was also an aura refining disciple, if he didn't always hang out with them, he'd be too unsociable. The first time he saw her, he didn't recognize her as a girl. Although she was too delicate, her behavior didn't have the slightest hint of femininity. At that time he only felt a bit curious. This child always greeted people with a smiling face and was amiable, but there was a faint pride in her eyes. This wasn't the kind of pride that came from looking down on others. Rather, it was a kind of self-confidence and self-respect. But how could a little aura refining cultivator possibly arouse his interest? Therefore he was only curious for a moment. Then, during the trip to Miwu Valley, they were inseparable for several days. Only then did he feel strange. He always felt there was a familiar aura on her body, as if it was something that belonged to him. When she wasn't paying attention, he probed her with his divine comprehension and discovered her secret. She turned out to be a woman. Moreover, it was a woman who wore his spirit-concealing pendant. Later, through other means, he found out that she had an uncle who was a foundation-building cultivator. At this point he was 80% sure of her identity. So it turned out to be that girl from back then. It was really too much of a coincidence for him to meet her in such a small cultivation group. It was only then that he began to pay attention to her from time to time. As a result, he discovered that although her appearance was poles apart from his, their characters were actually surprisingly similar. She was hardworking, calm, enterprising, and decisive. These were the things he believed a successful cultivator must have. She seemed to be no different from other aura refining disciples, but in fact she completely fulfilled these requirements. When she looked at others, even if she was talking and laughing warmly, her eyes would still contain alienation and vigilance. She seemed to be on guard against everyone out of habit. However, when she encountered something, she was often more enthusiastic than others. She was such a contradictory person. Therefore he thought that in the end she was still a child and needed to be tempered. Therefore, his feelings for her didn't start from this moment. At this time he still regarded her as a child who was struggling with contradictions, but he also felt admiration and found interesting. His feelings for her also didn't start from the 2 months he brought her back. At that time he only sympathized with her and felt pity for her rough life, so he gave her more patience than other people. But that was all. Chapter 245. He never denied his admiration for this woman. Maybe it was because of Mingzhu or maybe it was because of those admirers, but he never really took women seriously. He always felt that although their talents weren't inferior to men's, they often had too many messy things in their hearts. Except for a few, they weren't suitable for cultivation. However, Mo Chenga was the only one he felt was special. She was diligent. Even when her talent was extremely poor, she didn't feel remorse. Instead, she worked twice as hard as others. Even after she found out her talent was outstanding, she still didn't slack off. She was serious. Ever since he met her, he'd never seen her put her mind on other messy things. She only seriously cultivated and seriously walked her own path. She loved herself. Ever since she was a little aura refining cultivator with nothing to her name, if she wanted to go further on the path to immortality, she always worked hard on her own and never sold her own pride and self-respect. She also had some wisdom. Although she still made mistakes and took the wrong path, she always learned from them. Ever since he met her, she was just an insignificant little cultivator in Kunwu, but she slowly grew to become a real elite disciple of a big cultivation group today. Her efforts and persistence never changed, but her experience and way of dealing with things were growing. Although he himself helped her a little, her talent and hard work were also undeniable. In fact, in a way she was very lucky. He thought she had trash spiritual roots, but it turned out she was a genius. Moreover, she was favored by deification cultivators and obtained some rare treasures. However, her own efforts were worthy of this kind of result. In fact, which of the cultivators who could reach this far weren't the result of hard work and luck? His master could be considered unlucky. He had to rely on his own cultivation to make realm breakthroughs, but he had many rare treasures for fights of magical power, and these were also the foundation of his status. Martial Uncle Jinyong, Martial Uncle Miaoi, and Master Song Feng, who had a grudge against them. Which one of them hadn't encountered fated chances and obtained rare treasures? This included Qin Mu himself. Everyone in West Kunwu said that Qin Shoujing was a rare genius in the celestial pole, but what was the truth? He had dual spiritual roots. Even if both spiritual roots were excellent, how could he compare to those true geniuses with single spiritual roots or mutated spiritual roots? Even if he was simple-minded and never encountered bottlenecks, it was still the same. Before he built his foundation, it was indeed the result of his own efforts, but he also couldn't have done without his master's help. After reaching the foundation establishment realm, he often went out, both to temper his mental state and to seek opportunities. Because he felt that he could not rely on his master for the rest of his life. His luck wasn't bad and he was also alert enough. Therefore he smoothly encountered many fated chances and obtained many spiritual treasures, including the Yang spiritual bead and the 3 Yang real fire sword. He formed his gold core at the age of 78. Those who didn't know would be surprised that he, a cultivator with 2 spiritual roots, could reach this level. But in reality, it was because he had obtained the Yang spiritual bead. The Yang spiritual bead was a kind of unique treasure condensed from the spiritual aura of heaven and earth. In itself, it was condensed from extremely pure Yang spiritual aura. Although it was small, it had sucked dry a certain spiritual vein in Kunwu, turning it into an ordinary mountain peak without any spiritual aura at all. Then, it was buried somewhere for tens of thousands of years before he found it. Therefore, after obtaining the Yang spiritual bead, he didn't need to absorb spiritual qi from the outside world anymore, because in a way, he already had an entire spiritual vein inside his body. Such a rare treasure allowed his cultivation to advance by leaps and bounds, allowing him to smoothly advance to the core formation realm at the mere age of 78. However, if it was another person, would they definitely be able to obtain these treasures and encounter these opportunities? Sometimes, even if there were opportunities and rare treasures in front of them, those who didn't work hard still wouldn't be able to obtain them. Those who didn't know how to work hard but were always superior to those whose cultivation levels were higher than theirs because of their natural endowments or opportunities, or those who didn't work hard because they had outstanding natural endowments, would never understand these principles. Therefore, from a certain point of view, he admired this woman because she allowed him to see himself. His master told him that opposites or similar people would easily become curious about each other, and curiosity was the first step to developing feelings for each other. He didn't believe it at first, but now he had no choice but to believe it. When did he start to see her as a woman instead of a child? Perhaps it was when he came to Shenqing School and regained his original identity, or perhaps it was during those long 35 years. He wanted to recall, but he found he couldn't remember clearly. Sometimes, he even felt that these feelings seemed to have no reason at all and suddenly arose. Because he admired her, he was curious. Because he was curious, he paid attention to her. Because he paid attention to her, he put more thoughts into his mind. When he put more thoughts into his mind, in the end, he couldn't bear to let go. Sometimes, when he carefully thought about it, perhaps it was because she had already grown up when they met, right? Their meeting was 7 years late, giving her enough time to grow up. Therefore, in the beginning, although he still thought about this child, he was very clear in his heart that she had already grown up and wasn't a child anymore. She regarded him as a cultivator in the same realm and would joke with him, share some of her experiences and even talk about some of her worries. This kind of relaxed and pleasant feeling made him happy. The reason he subconsciously wanted to conceal his identity was also because he liked this feeling of equality between them. He always felt that if he told the truth, the distance between them would suddenly become far apart, and she would no longer have that kind of trust in him. He told Zhong Muling that if he didn't conceal his identity, she wouldn't stay at Shenqing School. Yes, this was one of the reasons. At that time she was like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. If she knew his true identity, she probably would have tried every means to escape, right? She could trust Qin Shi a little, but she couldn't trust Qin Shoujing wholeheartedly, especially when she escaped like that back then. When he saved her during the demonic beast riot, he didn't think too much about it. In the end, did he have any extra feelings for her at that time? It seemed like too much time had passed, so he somewhat couldn't remember. However, he was certain that at that time, he didn't have any thoughts of dual cultivation. He wouldn't take a fancy to a cultivator who had just built her foundation, even if she was extraordinarily talented. A gap of more than 100 years was nothing in the eyes of cultivators, and he also wasn't related to her by blood. Even he and her father were nothing more than companions. Although they were close friends, in reality, there was still a gap of more than 100 years between them. Was it because of seniority? For cultivators, this was a problem that simply didn't exist. There was only one thing he couldn't ignore: the gap between their cultivation levels. He patiently pondered, searching for traces of the past in the depths of his heart, but he soon discovered that the reason was so simple. He wasn't a transcendent being. The utilitarian nature of cultivators was deeply buried in his bones and blood. Even if he had a good impression of her, he, Qin Shoujing, the future hope of Xianqing School, wouldn't want to marry a woman who had just built her foundation and whose path to immortality was unknown. These were the fragments he picked up when he recalled them today. Back then he never thought about them. Later, when he entered the virtual sky world and met those two deification cultivators, he once again suffered that kind of humiliation. He originally thought he was looking at her from a high place, so he had a bit of a good impression of her, but he couldn't convince himself to let go of his cultivation level. As it turned out, in other people's eyes, he was only a furnace. Furnace? These two words were the greatest humiliation to a man. It was even more so for Qin Shoujing, who thought highly of himself and considered everyone beneath him. Therefore he cultivated like crazy, wanting to let those two know that he, Qin Shoujing, would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with them, even surpass them and eventually step into the great Tao. However, his master said that he'd entered his own demonic barrier and told him to think carefully about the innocence he had when he first started cultivating. At that time he didn't cultivate for any reason. He just wanted to cultivate, that's all. Therefore he didn't have any encumbrances or obsessions. He just cultivated wholeheartedly. But now he didn't. These past few years, it wasn't that he didn't know his state of mind had changed. He was no longer the Qin Shoujing who didn't have any extra feelings, didn't know the taste of obsessions, had a pure heart and few desires, and had a pure Tao heart. However, once he changed, how could he return to his original innocence? He tried to calm himself down, and thus he went into seclusion for 35 years. In these 35 years he had actually fallen into the trap he set up, and in the end he firmly trapped himself. The more he wanted to prove himself, the more he loved her in his imagination. Thus he was plagued by obsessions and the demonic barrier was difficult to get rid of. Today he slowly sorted out these thoughts that he had never thought about in the past from the corners of his memories, no matter how difficult it was to speak of these thoughts of the past. He originally thought that he would be like this for the rest of his life, immersed in the Tao of immortality, lonely all his life and finally stepping onto the supreme great Tao. Or perhaps he would truly fall in love with a woman, no matter what her identity or status was, accompanying her until the end of his life and passing away together. However, as it turned out, he wasn't as pure and simple as he thought he was, and he wasn't as noble and virtuous as he thought he was. He developed feelings for a woman, but because he was limited by his cultivation, he enjoyed the feeling of superiority from looking down on her. Because his self-esteem and this feeling of superiority had been violated, he cultivated madly so that he could look down on her again. Why did he have such a dark mood? Perhaps it was because he couldn't let go of her, but he couldn't let go of his laughable self-esteem even more. He didn't want to admit that he was the one who had fallen in love first. Or perhaps he had always been so utilitarian, no different from those other cultivators. Master was right. He had entered the demonic barrier, thinking that if he focused on cultivating until he reached the nascent soul realm, he would be able to break away from these unspeakable darkness. But in reality this was just putting the cart before the horse. However, even if he understood his own heart, he still wouldn't say these words now. If he said them now, how was it different from wanting to use her? If he couldn't form a nascent soul, he wanted to obtain her so that he could break away from his obsession and smoothly form a nascent soul? He didn't want to do such a lowly thing, and he wasn't even willing to have the slightest bit of relationship with her. This was the last bit of perseverance he could achieve after admitting to all his darkness. The great Tao of immortality in the end had to be walked by oneself. How could he place his hopes on unorthodox methods? Even if he loved her, cultivating to become an immortal was still his lifelong wish. And she, in all likelihood, wouldn't want a relationship that was mixed with utilitarian feelings. Therefore, if she loved him, if she couldn't let go, then she would wait until he formed a nascent soul and she formed a gold core. Then she would simply ask, "Are you willing to explore the Tao of immortality together?" If she was willing, then his long-cherished wish could be fulfilled. If she wasn't willing, then he wouldn't have any fate in this lifetime. Chapter 246. After an unknown period of time, the laughter of women rang out in Xianqing Palace. Several young and beautiful female building foundation realm cultivators ran over while laughing and fooling around. Just as they were about to run to Mingxin residence, they suddenly stopped in astonishment and looked at the man who was sitting on the railing, as if he had become one with the stone pillar carved with a dragon. Martial Uncle Shou Jing? Xianshu blinked as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Daihua exchanged a glance with her, then turned to look at Xiuqin and Qingqi. Qingqi finally moved. He swept his gaze over them and said, "Do you know what happened?" His expression was very cold. The four female cultivators were silent for a while, not daring to answer. Xiuqin said cautiously, "We heard Martial Uncle Emo had an accident inside the 10,000 Laws of Nature formation. Since you already know, why are you still making such a ruckus?" There was absolutely no blame in his tone, only indifference like a stone pillar. It was still the eldest of the four, Xiuqin, who said, "Yes, we will be careful in the future." He didn't say anything more. He turned his head and closed his eyes as if he didn't want to care about anything else. Qin, Qi, Shu and Hua looked at each other, bowed and carefully walked towards Ming Xian residence. Wait. The four of them felt their hearts skip a beat. Although Uncle Shoujing normally didn't like to smile, he was still very amiable. Today he was truly frightening, even more frightening than their grandmaster. Xiuqin asked softly, "Martial Uncle Shoujing, do you have any other instructions?" Qin didn't even turn his head. He said faintly, "Mingzhu was also injured. Did you see her?" "Yes, Mame and the others are behind us. They will bring senior sister Ruan back soon." He waved his hand behind him. "You guys can go." The four of them cautiously walked towards Mingxin residence. Upon discovering that Martial Uncle Mo's formation wasn't activated, they quietly walked inside. After entering the courtyard, Xianshu whispered, "What happened to Martial Uncle Shoujing? How terrifying." "Who knew?" Qingqi frowned. Suddenly she was surprised. Martial Uncle Shoujing appeared here. Did he come out of seclusion? Daihua was deep in thought. Didn't they say that it was a closed-door seclusion? I thought I was seeing things. Why did Martial Uncle Shoujing come out? It's one thing for you to come out, but why are you still sitting here in a daze? Xianshu was confused. Qingqi said, "Maybe?" Martial Uncle Shoujing wanted to go back to Mingxin residence, but in the end he remembered Martial Uncle Emo was living here now. Xiuqin said, "Nonsense, ever since Martial Uncle Shoujing moved out, how many times has he come back? Didn't you follow me to the main hall and leave after talking to Grandmaster?" "That's true." Xianshu's eyes shifted about. She then moved closer and whispered, "Did you guys hear? Today it was Martial Uncle Shoujing who suddenly went to the bottom of the valley on the main peak and brought Martial Uncle Emo back." Daihua cried out in alarm. Realizing that she was too loud, she hurriedly covered her mouth and whispered, "I came out late. I don't know. What's going on?" "I don't know," said Leisure. "That's all I've heard. It reminds me of a rumor from decades ago." The four of them looked at each other and knew what each other wanted to say. Qingqi rubbed her chin and said, "I thought it was just a rumor. There must be a reason for the groundless rumors." Leisure smiled. "We've been serving Grandmaster for almost 100 years. How could we not know about Martial Uncle Shoujing's matters? Martial Uncle Emo was accepted by Grandmaster because of Martial Uncle Shoujing. Moreover, back then, don't you think Martial Uncle Shoujing really treated her much better than other people?" "You're right," Daihua said, "but I still don't believe it. How could Martial Uncle Shoujing possibly? Otherwise, why would he be standing guard outside now? Think about Martial Uncle Shoujing's appearance just now. When have we ever seen him sitting on the railing so casually and in a daze?" Leisure continued to speak in an enigmatic manner. "In my opinion, that's most likely the case." Daihua said, "Aren't you thinking too much? We've been by Grandmaster's side for so many years, but when have we ever seen anyone with a more resolute Dao heart than Martial Uncle Shoujing?" "That's true." Leisure shook her head, overturning what she just said. "In any case, it's none of our business." In the end, it was Xiuqin who spoke. "Enough. Martial Uncle Shoujing just taught you a lesson, but you still have so much to say. Did he not teach you enough?" Leisure hastily shut her mouth. Qingqi muttered, We just laughed a few times, but Martial Uncle Shoujing taught us that much. It's not like we didn't. Martial Uncle Mo's injured." Xiuqin stopped her from continuing. "Grandmaster treats us generously, but we can't be lazy with what we should do. I heard Martial Uncle Mo's injuries are quite serious, but we're still laughing. Aren't we just looking for trouble for others?" It's fine if you didn't see it, but since you said it, we should restrain ourselves a bit. The other three nodded and sighed, then followed Xiuqin back to the small house. In fact, it was no wonder they were still laughing and joking after returning. Although they knew Martial Uncle Mo was injured, her life wasn't in danger, so Grandmaster didn't take it seriously. Besides, although they didn't dare to disobey Martial Uncle Mo, they didn't have any friendship with her. However, Xiuqin's words were obviously nonsense, but the meaning behind her words was rather thought-provoking. They're happy but others feel uncomfortable. Is it because Martial Uncle Mo's injured? The four of them couldn't help but think about this. Qin sat in a daze for a while. During that time he saw Mame and the others really brought Ruan Mingzhu back. Now that the masters of Mingxin residence and Zhili house were in trouble, the maids of Shangqing Palace lamented their bad luck, but they were also helpless. Qin, Qi, Shu, and Hua were the closest to Mingxin residence, so it was always the four of them who took care of all the chores in Mingxin residence. As for Zhili house, although Ruan Mingzhu hadn't been in Mount Taikang for a long time, her identity was still there, so Mei Lan Zhu and Zhu had no choice but to take care of her. The sex trial this time practically turned the high-purity palace upside down. Qin couldn't sit still after being stared at by the maids with strange gazes again and again. He stood up and slowly walked towards the main hall. But as soon as he stepped into the main hall, he regretted it. There was only Lord Dawish Jinghe at the scene, seemingly waiting for him. Qin thought about it and didn't escape. Master. Lord Dawish Jinghe seemed a bit surprised. He glanced at Qin and said, "What took you so long?" "I was sitting and thinking about something." "Thinking about something?" Lord Dawish Jinghe's eyes brightened. "Thinking about what?" Qin didn't answer right away. Instead he picked up a chair and sat down, staring blankly again. Although he already figured it out, he still wasn't used to this kind of state. His heart was full of miscellaneous things, but it turned out to be like this. In that case, sometimes women couldn't be blamed. Women were always more sentimental, and some things couldn't be controlled once they started. However, he had always been strong-willed. Since he'd decided to do something, he wouldn't hesitate anymore. "Master, why do you care so much?" he said faintly. "Brat." Lord Dawish Jinghe blew his beard and glared at him. "How can you talk to your master like this? If I don't talk to you like this, you'll feel uncomfortable all over, right?" It was rare for Lord Dawish Jinghe to be silent. He pondered for a while, then said, "Brat, you're not in the right mood today. You know, but you still provoke me." Qin didn't hide it. In any case, he'd already done some things clearly enough. Rather than being laughed at by this dirty old man, he'd better be frank. Lord Dawish Jinghe didn't speak for a long time, but his eyes kept sizing him up. After a while he smiled. "Brat, you finally figured it out?" Qin didn't evade. He stared at the void and said faintly, "Master, what else do you want to ask? Just say it all at once." The calmer his attitude was, the happier Lord Dawish Jinghe was. This meant this brat had made up his mind. "Tell me your plan first." He couldn't stop smiling. "In fact, although there's a gap between the two of you in cultivation, it's not big. Whether it's Chinga's mental state or cultivation level, the conditions for her to form her gold core are ripe. As soon as she forms her gold core, you'll be cultivators in the same realm as her. As for you advancing to the nascent soul realm in the future, she'll just be a bit slower. You don't have to." "I want to advance to the nascent soul realm." Qin interrupted him. Lord Dawish Jinghe was interrupted halfway, so he shouted, "What did you say? You still haven't given up? Haven't you figured it out?" Qin looked down at the teacup in his hand. His gaze was gentle, but his tone was firm. "I won't tell you unless I advance to the nascent soul realm." "You?" Lord Dawish Jinghe almost choked. After a long time he whispered, "What are you doing?" "Qin," said softly, "if I tell you now, what would it look like? Would I demand repayment? Or would I use my power to oppress others?" Lord Dawish Jinghe frowned. "What nonsense are you talking about? This kind of thing is consensual. If Chinga isn't willing, she can just refuse. We won't force her to do anything. But what will she think?" Qin lowered his head. "Yes, master, you've had a good relationship with her all these years, but no matter how good your relationship is, she's always on guard against others in her heart. Master, she's about to form her gold core now, so you better not disturb her mood." Lord Dawish Jinghe was silent for a long time. In the end he sighed. "But have you ever thought that if you form your nascent soul, she'll be even further away from you?" Qin's hand moved, but he didn't raise his head. Lord Dawish Jinghe continued to say, All these years I've more or less learned about her temperament. The pride in Chenga's heart isn't any less than yours. You don't want to use her, but isn't she the same? Therefore, the higher your cultivation level is, the further away she'll be from you. Qin she didn't speak for a long time, but Lord Daoist Jinghe saw his hand trembling slightly. After a long time he asked, "What do you think, master? She'll need at least 10 or 20 years to form her gold core, right? Am I supposed to stop cultivating and wait until she catches up to me?" Lord Daoist Jinghe chuckled. "Child, are you stupid? Wait until you two succeed, then you form your nascent soul. Do you think she'll go back on her words?" Qin she didn't nod. He seemed to be thinking. After going back and forth several times he finally said, "Then I'll wait. In any case she'll form her nascent soul in 200 years at most. I still have a lot of time, so I can wait slowly." Lord Daoist Jinghe choked. He didn't expect Qin she would make such a decision in the end. But after pondering for a long time he finally didn't object and said, "Fine, maybe this is the best way. Even if she forms her gold core now, there's still a big gap between the early stage and the peak stage of the core formation realm. But after she forms her nascent soul, she probably won't have any other ideas." At this point, Lord Daoist Jinghe looked up with an inscrutable expression. "But are you really willing to wait 200 years? That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."